I'm going to tell y'all right now, all of these wonderful people would not be here without Patreon supporters like you. If you enjoy credible news, reviews, and commentary on UFOs and UAPs 5 days a week, you want to support this show. What's your name? Marty. Marty, look how easy this is, Marty. Pick up your phone. Boom, you're a Patreon member. I mean, look, it's so easy. You just click the link, which is right here. Just for $1 a month, you can support this show. Just fill out the information and pledge what's comfortable for you. It could be $1, $5, $10, or who knows. Just support.
Hello, and welcome to another week at the Unidentified Celebrity Review. I know many of you are looking forward to today's interview. I am too. It's bound to be very interesting. You know, this topic, UFOs, alien life, is one of the most mysterious topics facing us. Sometimes it can feel like we are all lost in the woods. And lost in the woods is a dangerous place to be. Even if you originally set off in the correct direction, it's easy to lose your way. A slight deviation from the true direction can compound over time. And without additional references, it's likely that you'll unknowingly circle back and be right where you started. And the same threat faces us all as we try to navigate out of the murkiness that is ufology. It is, of course, incredibly fun to explore the differing paths available to us. But without solid evidence, be careful of treading too far down a specific path. It may look like you're on the right trail, but you may be headed in the opposite direction. So be vigilant and keep your eyes open. Explore paths, but don't lose sight of where you started. And keep any concrete references in sight. At least, that's my advice to you. You can join me as I examine different maps, trying to determine if they lead the way out of the woods on my channel, rather be squidding. But here now, we are joined by other travelers. They may have information that will illuminate the path. And helping to extract that information, as always, are our hosts here at the Unidentified Celebrity Review. Please join me in welcoming Luis Jimenez and UFO Jane.
Hey, guys.
Hi. Hey, happy Monday.
Happy Monday. Well, welcome back. How was your weekend? Although we saw each other on Saturday. So how was your Sunday?
Did you guys get home okay after that party at Josh and Artemis's place? It was crazy.
It was a wild one.
It was wild.
I woke up hungover the next day.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even drink anything and I was
exactly.
hungover.
Need to drink anything.
It was fun. I mean, that show's fun. Hello. Good morning, good evening, good day, good afternoon, and aloha. Welcome back, you beautiful people, to another episode of the Unidentified Celebrity Review, your home for credible news, reviews, and commentary on everything UAP and UFO. My name's Luis Jimenez. Again, Jane, thank you guys for being here. Gems in my life. Thank you. Before we get started, of course, I want to remind you guys we have a Patreon, ways to support the show through Super Chats. We're going to open the show up to an Ask Me Anything and AMA. So go ahead and save those questions for the end. And they don't have to be Super Chats. We're going to pick out the best questions that we have and then throw them at John and Sean. What else? We've got thank you DOS Tapes for the music. They provide all the tunes. Their Bandcamp link is in the description below. Jane and John Ramirez and Sean Webb's link are in the description below. And our merch store link is in the description below, along with our Discord. Check out the Discord. It's a lot of fun. All right. So without further ado, let's bring on our guest for the day, shall we, guys?
Yeah. I'm ready.
Do it.
Yeah,
so first man up is Mr. Sean Webb. Sean, how you doing?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Welcome back, man. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. When I threw the idea out there and you're like, yeah, let's do it. I'm like,
I'm up for anything.
Yeah, I can't wait to see where this conversation goes with you in here now. I mean, so this will be a fun roundtable and back and forth between everybody. Of course, he's very hung up. Well, before we get there, let's just bring in the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. John Ramirez. John, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back on.
It's an absolute pleasure. I know you had a little bit of trepidation about coming on because you're like, well, what else is there to talk about? Like, I mean, we kind of
oh my gosh, what else?
What else?
So
and I'm like, John, really? There's so many questions. We didn't even get into your childhood. I want to get, if you allow us, if it's, we'll see where we can get, but I kind of want to ask you a couple personal questions, just to, like we were talking on the pre-show, sort of humanize you a little bit, and then get into the heavy stuff with you. And I know Rather's still hung up and got a ton of questions about this hotel meeting, so I'm sure we'll get to those as well. But Happy New Year. I'm glad you were able to make it back, and I'm glad we have this opportunity again. So I guess let's start here, John. You're a married man, right?
Yes.
Okay. What did your wife think about this story? Like, is this something you told her, before you got married? She knew you were into this from the start, or is this something you kind of held and hid, and then all of a sudden we're like, hey, by the way, I'm into this?
Well, actually, we met online. It was a dating site called Meet, MEET, mindful.com. And it's a dating site for people who want to reach out and meet other people who have these experiences, who are believers, who practice mindful meditation. So all the women I've met through this dating site were of that frame of mind to begin with.
Wow.
And so when I met my wife and I had the first date with her at the restaurant I took her to, we spent several hours, practically closed the place down, just talking about our experiences. And she's had many experiences, and I've had many experiences, as many of you know. And so we shared our experiences. And so we talked about everything from UFOs to ETs to you name it, even like astral projection. I mean, she was already in that frame of mind. So it wasn't unusual for me to come forward with my story, because her story was just as unusual as mine. So I actually met and married an experiencer. That makes it a lot easier.
Wow. Oh, man, that opens up so many questions. Now I want to talk to your wife. Where's Miss Ramirez? Where is she? Let's bring her on. What were some of the commonalities that you found in that first conversation between each other?
Well, one of them was that she felt like when she was growing up and she was very small, that she didn't belong on the planet, that she got left behind, and the family she was living with, was born into, was not her real family. And so she already had, similar to what I experienced, of not really being a resident of Earth, that I belonged somewhere else. I belonged out in the stars, out in space somewhere. I got left behind. I'm an orphan, and I want them to like come take me back, because somebody made a wrong turn and dropped me off at the wrong place. I've always felt that way, and to in most regards, she feels the same way. And having said that, she loves her family. I love my family, and it's the family that we were born into, but we feel like we're part of a cosmic family as well out there, and that we are here to strive to reconnect to that cosmic family. But we have a mission to do here. We have work to do here. She was sent here to do work. I was sent here to do work. And we found each other, and we're helping each other out.
Wow.
That was not the answer I was expecting.
I mean,
most of the times, I've asked that question, people, and I've heard it in other interviews, and a lot of the time, the spouse or significant other is not interested in the subject, or they're supportive, but like are not a believer too. So do you think that has, well, when did you meet your wife? Do you mind if I ask? Because I have never heard of this MT. Is it still around? I'm sure some people in the live chat are probably going to want to hear about. Go on to this.
Oh, Meet Mindful, definitely. It's still around. I just made sure that it was still around because I kind of felt like someday somebody's going to ask me that question, and I went on that site and it's still there. But yeah, I understand.
You're not an investor in this site, are you?
No, I'm not. But I credit it with like
maybe we all should be
having interesting relationships with the various women I've met through it. But I agree that it's very difficult when a spouse or family members, especially, are not believers and discount everything you might say. And especially when the experiencer is a young child, I'm kind of thinking, when children say that they have an imaginary playmate, it might be more than an imaginary playmate, because I think certain children, probably at a young age, when they're not filtering out everything adults tell them to filter out, that this is all make-believe, that don't believe it, it's not real. Children seem to have an unfiltered view of the world. And so to look at this phenomenon through a child's eyes is the way I approach it. And that's why I always said that, like a child, I would embrace everything widely, because at that young age, you're not discerning, facts and fiction for yourself. Well, so I embrace widely. But as I get information from others, when things started to ring true, I will hold on to it a little more tightly. And then there are things that people have experienced or people say, claiming to be, for example, like somebody from my profession, that is the intelligence community, and they say things to my ears sounds outlandish. I don't completely dismiss it, but I hold it very lightly until I can find sources for myself to either prove or disprove what that person says. And so that's the approach I take, and I recommend that approach. And so actually, when people didn't believe me that I was from CIA, I actually celebrated the fact that people did not believe that, because then they'll need to look into what I say or look into my background. I can offer things later. And then once the messenger is accepted as genuine, I think it's fine to be skeptics of my message or other people's messages when they have these experiences or may know something that they've acquired professionally through information they receive through their jobs. So I'm not here to convince anybody of anything, really. If you don't believe, that's fine. It's good not to believe. It's good to believe. But again, I say this, that there are skeptics and there are debunkers. And a debunker, to me, a true debunker is someone who actually knows the truth, but for whatever reason is going to turn that truth around and then make it untrue and try to convince people it's untrue. To me, that's a debunker. And if they're doing that with the full knowledge that they're doing this deliberately, I have no respect for those people at all. But there are real debunkers who, take the materialistic science approach, and they're skeptics. And I fully embrace that. I mean, don't believe everything that you read or hear or read on the internet, especially the internet.
John, what do you think about the idea that there is a certain subset of the populace that may not be ready for the truth, and maybe those guys need a psychological release valve to glom onto? I look at Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? And I know he's an intelligent guy, and I know he smokes pot, and I know there's no way in hell that he doesn't think that UFOs are a real phenomenon and that extraterrestrials might actually exist. And yet he's out in the public saying, no, it's all, if they were so intelligent, why would they come here to talk to us? And, where are they? And all this, the classic Carl Sagan lines, where he was positive on ET and extraterrestrials to a point, and then all of a sudden he went completely 180. It may come with the Host of Cosmos contract, I don't know, but Neil deGrasse Tyson steps up there and says, all that stuff is bupkis and yada yada yada. Do you think that there's a subset of the populace, and maybe there's a value there for the debunker to step up and say, although I know the truth, I need to be a psychological release valve for the folks who just can't handle the information right now? Because I also noticed that in a lot of the articles that you see in magazines and newspapers and whatnot about this stuff, there's a paragraph at the very bottom that says, or all this stuff could be bullshit, right? Is that a potential intentional release valve for the folks who might not be able to handle it at this point, and give them a life preserver to latch on to?
Well, I definitely think that it serves a purpose to look at all aspects of this phenomenon, including the more science-based aspects of the phenomenon, to actually say, how can they travel these distances? It would take forever to get here. So in effect, they kind of build a sandbox around the phenomenon. And so there's the edges of the sandbox. But I would think that as more information officially comes out slowly, what I call this controlled dissemination of information, that sandbox gets a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. So you're pushing the edges of that sandbox out. And so folks like Neil deGrasse Tyson are in that sandbox. And so they'll stay confined in that sandbox. But as the government then makes the sandbox bigger, they would have to follow along, I would think, or that they're going to be made to look very foolish. That, in fact, they're clinging on to outmoded ideas in spite of maybe government dissemination of newer ideas to consider. So I don't know if it's a emotional or a psychological release valve, but definitely it gives a little bit of comfort, a little bit of security for folks who are not ready to embrace it all. And so, I mean, I think that's why, like, no one in government who's sitting in an office, like the president of the United States, would stand up at a podium and say, "Oh, by the way, we lied about Roswell. It actually was a craft from somewhere, and there actually are beings that are not human that we studied, and we still have them stored away, so we can further study them." I mean, that would cause such a disruption in society. I mean, everything would cave in politically, economically, socially, spiritually. Everything would just cave in at that point. And I don't think they want that. But in a way, I think that's why the government is allowing people like me, like Lou, like Jim Semivan, like Chris Mellon, and all of us to actually state things that we've learned through our profession and also through our experiences as well. They're not like, I've never received anything official from the government saying you can't talk about this anymore. Nothing whatsoever. And so maybe it is a release valve, but I'm kind of thinking that it's more kind of like an acclimation more than anything, getting acclimated to the idea slowly but surely. And I'm sure this happened when people discovered way back when that, oh, by the way, the earth is not flat. It's round. And so it's a sphere. And so it's that slow, gradual release of that information.
I'd like to kind of jump on something you said there. You mentioned that the government is allowing you to say what you're saying, along with, Jim Semivan and Lou Elizondo. And I guess, kind of one of the, to be honest, the reasons why I'm a little bit more skeptical towards you and challenge you more than other people is because you kind of have that air of, authority with being at the CIA. But, it's my understanding, previously when you said to us that you haven't really been read into any of these CIA UFO programs. So,
that's correct.
For you specifically, you aren't really, most of your information or any of your information wasn't acquired professionally, right? So, why would you say that the government is letting you say anything?
Yes, it was acquired professionally because I was briefed about the Orbs working group. And I was briefed in that hotel room that you want to talk about, rather. That was an official professional presentation.
Sure, but the Orbs briefing or the Orbs.
The Orbs are real. I was briefed about them, and I was asked to send engineers to it. I put that in my presentation.
Sure, but you weren't briefed into the study of that.
I absolutely
are you saying that you know professionally at the origin?
I absolutely don't know exactly what they discussed in the working group, because that was highly compartmented. So I don't know. I know the existence of the fact of that the government was interested in these orbs, which were not terrestrial in origin. That I know.
So
as far as how they identified,
let out to you that it was not.
It was not anything that we would have. It's not anything that Russia would have. And in fact, I was asked, can your engineers then look at the weapon systems that could fly that high in that manner that might be in the Russian inventory? We didn't find anything like that. So we reported it's not Russian. It's not Chinese. They didn't have anything close that could reach that altitude. And in fact, nothing could reach that altitude that they were seeing. They were out in space. And so I know
how is the altitude hard to reach?
Pardon me?
I mean, we can send things to the moon, right? The altitude shouldn't be a limiting factor.
You missed the point, rather. I said there's nothing that the Russians would fly. They were asking for an aircraft. Is there a special aircraft the Russians can fly that can reach that altitude? No, there's nothing that the Russians can fly that could be a weapon system, a threat against us that could reach that altitude. So they're looking for actual,
not even like hypersonic gliders or anything.
This is 2003, 2004 when the working group was discussed.
Right when the right after 2001, there was a big arms race of hypersonic weapons. Right.
So there was no hypersonic glide vehicle at that point, because when they launch anything, they tell us what they're launching, because the hypersonic glide vehicle is basically a warhead that skirts the atmosphere, upper atmosphere, between space and the atmosphere. It's nothing special. It's basically a reentry vehicle designed to glide up in space, and it goes very fast. There's no exotic technology behind it. It's just a shape of the vehicle. Instead of a conical reentry vehicle that the Russians would like put on an SS-25 or SS-27 and launch it 700 miles up into space and have it come down to a target here.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's why I'm asking. When you're saying that,
that's not that.
You knew that they weren't terrestrial because they were up in space and traveling high, but that's exactly what these hypersonic gliders do.
They were flying in formation. They were flying in formation at an extremely fast rate, going someplace, and it was something that was not just detected by us, but other sensors as well. So now, let's say that there are things in Russia, okay? And there are things in Russia, their weapon systems, right? And let's say there's someone in Russia that tells us about their weapon systems and that we have that source of information, okay? So we bounce our technical information with human information, even open source information, with signals intelligence information. We gather together as all source intelligence to evaluate what is out there. And when we did the evaluation, it was nothing terrestrial that could have caused that to happen. And also,
sure. So I guess my question is, what is there any characteristics that you could tell us that distinguish it between, like, for example, a hypersonic glider?
Yes, absolutely. Because a hypersonic glide vehicle, when it's launched from a Soviet ICBM. A Russian ICBM will launch that hypersonic glide vehicle. In preparation for that launch, by treaty, the Russians tell us that they're launching a ballistic missile from this place to that place. They tell us where the impact point is. And in fact, we then can monitor their telemetry. When we launch a similar type weapon from Vandenberg to Kwajalein Atoll, we tell the Russians, oh, by the way, we're going to launch a ballistic missile. We're going to launch a Minuteman III with this type of reentry vehicle, and we tell them it's going to happen. And they're right there, ready to collect telemetry information. And in fact, we swap telemetry information. Okay, so there's no hypersonic glide vehicle that's not
right? Which is telemetry.
You're saying that you think that you're trying to tie it to something that's terrestrial, that's known. I'm saying that when something like that flies, we already know about it. There's no surprises up there. There's when the North Koreans launch missiles, we're not surprised the North Koreans launch missiles. We know about them because they are telltale signs. Okay, so if there were hypersonic glide vehicles, we would have known about it already, and we would have not have placed a working group of people looking at this as if it was not a terrestrial weapon. It was definitely not a terrestrial weapon. It's not terrestrial in any sense of the word, because we wouldn't have had that kind of working group. We wouldn't have the kind of energies we put into that working group of establishing a special compartment in that, because I know there was a compartment. I was asked if I
Isn't that exactly what the
CIA
CIA would do if they found, they observed something over the skies that they didn't know what it was and they thought it would be a potential threat? Like I'm uncertain how you can eliminate the terrestrial possibility without, being
Because
part of this working
we
group.
know all about the terrestrial capabilities of other countries. We know a lot about what's going on because we don't wait for the terrestrial capability to be launched. We have knowledge of the terrestrial capability when it's still on the drawing board. That's why you as a taxpayer pay your taxes, so we can have a central intelligence agency to develop sources in other countries to tell us what they're working on before they even become anything that is launchable. So we're well aware of weapon systems all over the world. That's something that people need to understand. That's why we have $90 billion a year spent on the intelligence community to collect that kind of information, so there are no more surprises. That's why CIA was created.
I mean, the CIA certainly doesn't know everything, though, right?
Surprise.
Like in the 2001 in the Gulf War, the weapons of mass destruction and stuff like that. They're not infallible.
We did know that there were no weapons of mass destruction.
Can I ask about the working group, the orb? So do you know or think that this working group looked into other orb sightings? Was that any part of what you were informed about? It sounds like they were maybe waiting for these orbs or expecting them to show up. Do you know if the group was set up before this event or after this event, or just can you expand it all upon it?
From when I was briefed into the fact of that CIA says I can say there was the fact of, I know that there's always been some interest in what's up there that's hard to explain. That's always been there. You know that. We all know that.
The CIA of all.
And so what happened was that these aren't like the metallic craft that we've been seeing all these years. These aren't like anything that we could describe as any kind of metallic craft that can fly with some exotic propulsion system. These were energy orbs. There was no discernible craft because the sensors that had detected these orbs are looking into the infrared. They're not like visual photographs. They're not like radar or anything like that. They're just looking for light energy. And when you have light energy like that, traveling the way it did, in that formation that it did, like the way many people have witnessed, civilians who are now saying, I saw these orbs. One or two went over my house and was just hanging there. I mean, the orbs exist.
Have there ever been?
If the orbs exist, you would know that our sensors who can detect the energy that these orbs emit would detect that type of energy. So what you're saying rather is you don't believe in orbs.
Well, no, and I do believe that there's probably weird stuff that is detected, but I have done a lot of research on these hypersonic vehicles, which I found very interesting. And there's a whole thing about after 2001 where George W. Bush, he kind of started this hypersonic arms race because he wanted to be able to launch missiles without launching ICBMs. So he started, doing this hypersonic vehicle route. And I guess my question to you is, have you seen hypersonic vehicles on radar? And my understanding is that when they're going through the atmosphere at, these excessive speeds, they are engulfed by plasma, right? Because they're going so fast and there's friction.
And what detects plasma? What detects plasma? What would detect plasma?
I'll defer to you, but
I just told you the story, and then you're coming back to me arguing against what I know to be flying up there from the NRO.
Well, no. What my question to you is,
yes,
what
you are.
Would differentiate a like a hypersonic vehicle engulfed in a plasma, going through the atmosphere? Would that look like an orb, or like what would that look like? And have you seen stuff like that before?
Yes, it can be seen. We can detect it electro-optically, optically. We can detect it through telemetry that we collect on the ground and from space, and from the aircraft, the ISR aircraft that can actually photograph it. When they fly
and you can see through that plasma sheath, and
the plasma sheath gets removed. It's only plasma at a certain altitude, and there's no longer plasma.
Well, it's plasma.
It's like a reentry vehicle. If you ever seen a reentry vehicle come down, there's a plume behind it, but once at a certain point, it's just a bunch of heat. But there's a solid object there that can be detected. There's telemetry on board that can be collected. So this was not
the lower in the atmosphere you go, the more plasma you'd get, right? Because you're encountering more air resistance.
Air resistance and plasma are two different things. You got friction, and then you have plasma.
I mean, in the hypersonic vehicles, I think we could probably agree on this. In a hypersonic vehicle, when you're going through the atmosphere, the lower you go and the faster you go, the more heat resistance that builds up. And if you're going fast enough, that heat will cause the air around you to ionize and become plasma. And that's what I'm talking about. I mean, if you're going really fast, at below the atmosphere and encountering a lot of this resistance, you'll get engulfed in a plasma.
So the orbs weren't at a descent. The orbs were flying at an extremely high altitude in space because our sensor is in space. And when it looks at the nape of the Earth, it's looking at all of the space above the Earth, not like in the atmosphere. So these orbs were creating that part of the spectrum where there's no air.
Okay, that is interesting.
Okay.
Sure.
So it's from space looking down. And so we didn't know about these orbs until we actually had sensors that can look from space down persistently. The Defense Satellite Program had satellites that were not exactly persistent collectors. They kind of blinked on and blinked off, and they're basically just looking for a hotspot on the ground. They were launch detection satellites. These are more prolonged, perpetual collection assets. They're constantly staring. And so it's that type of sensor that detected these things flying in space. So we eliminated hypersonic glide vehicles because there were no launches. And we eliminated any high-flying Russian aircraft because they're remarkable. They can fly anywhere from 85 to 100,000 feet is like the combat ceiling for a MiG-31 interceptor called the Foxhound. We eliminated that. There's plasma self-generators. We eliminated that. So we came up with, it's not anything that the Russians have in their inventory that could create this. And besides, the MiG-31 can only fly up to 123,000 feet, and it sustained that for a very brief time. But it was designed to fly between 85 to 100,000 feet with a look-down, shoot-down capability. It was designed to shoot down the SR-71 and the B-70 Valkyrie, which we never built. So it wasn't any of that. But the fact that it was flying in space, where our satellites are, and flying over Soviet airspace, that the fact that it was over Soviet airspace, we had to eliminate anything Russian. I keep using Soviet and Russian interchangeably. The fact that they were over Russian airspace, we had to eliminate anything in the Russian inventory.
Do some of these orbs show up in the visual spectrum in the orange ballpark?
600 nanometers.
Okay, so right there.
Yeah,
just
right
under,
about there.
Just under a 660 orange. Okay, so because I got to tell you, the SEALs and I have had multiple experiences seeing these orange orbs all over the East Coast. We live in North Carolina, and so you probably are understanding there's a lot of activity over here. That there's some classified locations that these guys train over off the East Coast, and they've seen them in training. And then again, we saw some just kind of hanging out fishing, and then we saw some the night of Doug's wedding, which was crazy. And over here, their activity is such that there are between 4 to 11, 12 craft that are together, moving in formation, seemingly in a very slow, steady pace that seems to be more of a levitation or a hovering than extremely fast movement, except when they start to disappear. And we thought originally, because if you're off in the distance and you see this light start to blink out, you think they're just disappearing or maybe dematerializing into another dimension or whatever it is. But at Doug's wedding, it was close enough and low enough that we actually saw a very light streak of light going from about 3,000 feet up well beyond the atmosphere. I mean, it was gone. It was literally almost a blink of an eye in disappearance. But there was a light streak where you could see it. They're leaving one at a time, straight up out of the atmosphere to a place where they were no longer visible. So yeah, it's pretty interesting phenomenon that we've seen multiple times over here.
So I mean, I guess am I getting this right? You're just trying to rule out what these things could possibly be from our layman's point of view, and try to offer solutions to, hey, maybe it was this, maybe it was that, maybe it was this. And John, I think your side of this is, no, we're not going to make like those kinds of mistakes. And even if it was A, B, C, and D, we have a catalog of A, B, C, and D, and we could differentiate what A, B, C, and D is, and we know what these capabilities are before they're even built. So we have a pretty good idea of what these things are going to look like before they're even up in the sky. Is that fair to say?
It is fair to say that there is a national signatures database. And signatures is the S in MASIN. Congress keeps getting it wrong. They call it measurement and signals intelligence. It's measurement and signature intelligence. And that signatures database is pretty much a database of every type of effluent in the atmosphere, any kind of electro-optical effects that may be seen, optical effects, radiological effects, everything is in that database. So that when we encounter signatures that we cannot identify, we bounce it against that database to see what it could be. And so when you have something like that, a 600 nanometer kind of orbs flying up in space very fast in formation with an intent to go somewhere, and it isn't Russian, of course, that's going to pique our interest. And so now with that spectra of it being kind of orangey already in the knowledge base, then we can then focus our sensors on not eliminating it as noise, because the sensors exist to look at things on the ground. I mean, it's a spy satellite. It looks for things on the ground. It looks for missiles, cruise missiles, anything that might be flying, even jet aircraft. It can detect the heat signatures from jet aircraft. Those signatures are in that database. When you see something flying up in space that you can't identify like that, that piques the interest of the intelligence community. And so that kind of played into, perhaps before there was another working group or other working groups related to UFOs, UAPs. And then this was like a new wrinkle that appeared that really got everyone's interest in studying these in more depth. And the fact that it occurred like 2004, that time frame, 2005, that's suspiciously close to 2007, when, according to Lukatsky, he was reading the Hunt for the Skinwalker book and said, my gosh, we need to like study this phenomenon. But from the civilian side of the intelligence community, we did that work. My understanding is they wrote a report and they're done with it. And so the report goes up to the DNI, and what the DNI does with it is up to the DNI at the time. But the DOD effort, the DIA effort, ALSAP, occurred after that working group. And I think it's just more than Skinwalker Ranch. It's studying like all aspects of the phenomenon. We're already reading about Skinwalker Ranch, but they did talk about orbs appearing in front of people, following them home, being seen in their homes as that hitchhiker effect. So whether those orbs are like the orbs we saw up in space, I don't know, but it's energy. It's some form of unexplained energy that seems to have an intelligence behind it.
And John, with the behavior profile of these orbs, would it be fair to say that the behavior profile is different from some of the other craft that have been reported by United States Navy aviators and military intelligence, such as the Tic Tac, the Go Fast, the Square with the sphere craft that they've reported?
Yeah, the orbs are more like energy. They're more like what people see as a personal experience. This light, ball of light that they see that has characteristics that displays some of the 5 observables that Lou speaks about. It's very different from something that's metallic. For example, when I look at the 3 videos, Tic Tac, Go Fast, and Gimbal, they look more like the kind of craft that people are seeing that are metallic, that have these crafts tend to have aerodynamic characteristics. And whether they're advanced technology from another country, ours that we aren't acknowledging, or what, I don't know. But they definitely have some kind of reflectivity in terms of like electromagnetic reflectivity. So they can be seen on radar. It's been said that that the Princeton, USS Princeton, with their radars, that they saw objects like this. The Spy 1 radar saw those objects. So I have to say, yeah, the orbs are different. The orbs are very much different. And they're not like, you can't fly to an orb like that. That's up in space. There is nothing like that that can like fly to it and make it do things, but they're there.
I am so fascinated by the orb phenomenon. I've researched UFOs here in Texas, and that's definitely been a persisting one. I will say, for folks viewing up the sky, Chinese lanterns get reported all the time as orange orbs that hover and then disappear. And there's a lot of other really interesting natural explanations, even like related to ball lightning and stuff. But then there are those other category, right? So I would be curious to learn more about the orbs and your theories. I mean, and because I know that you also mentioned on the last when you were on UCR, the McMinnville, is that correct, UFO, which was a disc, right? And so I looked up that one. It looks like there's some accusations that was just a model disc, on a thread, and that the shadows were off with the time of day reported. And so I know that kind of leading into another type of craft that you said that you believed were real, or the CIA believed those photos were real. Is that correct? Could you maybe talk to the discs a little bit and those photos and maybe how they're different than the orbs? Or
well, you're asking me to comment on photographs taken in 1950 before I was born. So
yeah, you said something.
I have no other source other than what the CIA official told us in that meeting.
Yeah.
That the McMinnville UFO is a real UFO, and we have not been able to debunk it.
So
this
it was
real UFO.
Source that just said we have not been able to debunk it. The
government hasn't.
Right.
Yeah, the government hasn't been able to debunk it.
So there wasn't
they take
any,
it as a real UFO.
Right. So there wasn't any like maybe particular briefing or aspect of evidence that you were clued in on, so we could.
No, it's just a statement of fact.
Go after the
exactly
the skeptics of the world with, because
right,
I definitely would want to. I'm definitely like curious to look into that case more. That was a farmer who saw your typical flying saucer,
right.
And the 50s, they were much more prevalent, it appeared, in the 40s and 50s versus today. So if you don't mind me, just the follow-up question, I mean, so there are very different, the orbs and the discs and the Tic Tac UFOs that are all the rage right now. Do you think that these are all connected, or are all these just entirely different phenomenons to you? And I know you can only speculate.
I can only speculate, and it's just my personal opinion. I would say that what we saw in the 40s and 50s are metallic craft are definitely it's interesting, they tend to reflect the technology that we have in a certain way. And I say that in the sense that like in the 40s and 50s, we were pursuing these craft with propeller-driven aircraft. And they weren't like flying like thousands of miles per hour. They were kind of like playing around with the propeller aircraft. They're flying at that speed. Now that we have the FA-18 and its speed, they're kind of like flying around so that they can be seen by the FA-18. It's really remarkable that, you know, that they do exhibit, the newer craft do exhibit some phenomenal aerodynamic characteristics. But in the 40s and 50s, you know, they were pursuing them with propeller-driven aircraft. Now we're pursuing them with jet aircraft. And up in space, that now that we have sensors that can detect IR in multiple bands, now they're showing themselves like that. So I don't know if they just want us to be aware that they're here, and that they're showing them, they're showing us that they're here. I'm not sure, which is why I keep going back to the 23-minute video Luke keeps teasing, because I don't know if any kind of craft that would like be around for 23 minutes for us to take videos of them. I would love to know more about that 23-minute craft. But it seems like they kind of they want to be seen. They're not completely hidden. They always want to be seen in some way. And for some people, it becomes a personal experience, that there's personal encounters. I can't describe why certain people see these personal encounters and others don't. I'm not sure. I understand at some of these CE5 events hosted by Dr. Greer that not everyone in his group sees what everyone else sees. Some look up and see nothing, others see something. So I can't explain that.
Speaking of personal experience, what has your experience been? Because you've hinted that you've had some background or experience previous in your life, and I have as well. But when did this start? When did your first experience occur? At what age? And can you give us a little bit of a characterization?
Yes, I spoke about living with my aunt and uncle in Fort Lee, Virginia, which is a military base, an Army base. And with my playmates and my cousins, looking out to my right and seeing a metallic craft, a silver craft that wasn't a saucer, but had a thicker middle and somewhat pointy ends. But it wasn't like the classic flat saucer at all. So I saw that. It's more like a Tic Tac, but more, I guess, tapered toward the ends, if you can imagine that. And I saw it float above the tree line. And I pointed to it with to my playmates and to my cousins, and they could not see it. They didn't see a darn thing. And I saw it lift up, and off it went. And then all of a sudden, it wasn't there. So that was my very first encounter with anything that would be called a metallic craft. And I have not seen a metallic craft personally since then.
Was that in the direction of the military base, or was that off base?
I was living on the base.
Yeah, you were.
Living
Where was
in
the
base
craft?
housing.
Was the craft in the direction of the base? Because I mean, I've been on multiple bases. I used to be in the military, and Miramar has huge stretches of land that are not used. Was that sighting over a portion of the base, or was it maybe off into the civilian areas?
I don't know what Fort Lee looked like back then. I look at Fort Lee now, and the area where I saw it is a correctional facility.
Okay.
For Virginia. But it may have been part of Fort Lee. What I do find interesting is the correlation between some of these sightings and nuclear weapons. Because my understanding is that Fort Lee was home to a Nike Hercules battery. And it had one of the SAGE, SAGE, SAGE command and control centers there. And the Nike Hercules, some were nuclear capable. They carried a nuclear warhead. Some of them did. So again, there's that correlation between this craft and Nike Hercules. And I don't know where the Nike Hercules might have been based at Fort Lee in the late 1950s, but they were there.
Okay. I just want to let everybody in the chat know, we see your questions. We'll be asking these questions to John here in the second hour. I appreciate all of them, so don't worry about it. We will get to them. I appreciate it. I am curious, from rather, okay. He's like my little teddy bear. I love him to death. But I mean, what is it about? Is there anything else as far as what John's saying from the capability standpoint that you think might be questionable? I guess, like, or not questionable. I mean, like, again, like, this is always tough because we don't want to.
Yeah, I'm not trying to say that you're lying or anything. I think that you're saying what you experienced and the truth, but I feel like, we might have different interpretations of what you experienced might reflect, right? And I guess kind of one of the questions I have is, you seem pretty confident that these orbs were non-terrestrial, right? And I guess I have a little bit trouble believing that even if they did go down the checklist and say it's not this, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this, would the CIA really say that it's non-terrestrial and not just say that we don't know what it is? Like, how can you make that leap to say that it's not terrestrial? Like, it's kind of it's unknown, but you're kind of saying you kind of know what it is, right?
They didn't know what it was. They just know it wasn't from Earth. It wasn't like anything that anyone would have on Earth. So therefore, if it's not on Earth, that is, if it's not terrestrial, it'll be non-terrestrial. So, but you can't.
That's like proving a negative.
Have you ever worked in an intelligence community and have nothing to work with? Sometimes you have to gather a little bit of this and that and try to weave a story based on the best sources you have and continue to study whatever is before you and try to either acquire or recruit or collect information through these sources. So it's an ongoing thing. The fact that it was non-terrestrial was based on the fact that there's nothing on the planet that behaved in that manner that the sensors saw.
And the other side of that, I think, is when you have technology that performs or behaves in a way that is beyond your current understanding of physics. That's a big.
But we're not getting that here. That's not what John is saying about these orbs.
Well, when you start to have energy that goes up into space, right, and you have a profile of, you understand what the other countries around the world have in the aspect of multi-use space vehicles, right? And you're seeing a technology that is exhibiting a multi-use daily, like, when you have a window of time where these things are all over the place and in active operation on multiple day, multiple
we're talking
window.
about one specific day that you saw these orbs, right, John? It wasn't a recurring pattern, or was it a recurring pattern that you were seeing that this task force established over?
I've only seen one data set, but the task force or the working group probably saw much more data, depending on the fact that who hosted this working group leads me to believe that there's a lot of imagery data to back up what I was surprised of. Well, otherwise, they would not have put together this working group. They would not have wasted
and
time
to
all
your
these
mind,
subject matter experts.
And you're talking about a chart. You're talking about a budget. You're talking about
right. It's not a working group can be put together based on, like, we need a working group. And the fact that it was in St. Louis, Missouri is because it's NGA and they have an office in St. Louis, Missouri. They have a building there in St. Louis, Missouri, and a brand new one that's going up in St. Louis, Missouri. It's the hub of geospatial intelligence in the United States outside of Washington, D.C. And so they gathered all the subject matter experts. They gathered everybody that they could from all of these big alphabet soup agencies and the contractors were there. And they studied it over a period of time. There were materials generated. There were other reports generated. There were older reports that this working group had access to, which is why my engineers wanted me to bring in a safe. So I had to get a safe from the General Services Administration with a combination lock on it, and they put materials from this working group, they filled it up. And so obviously to me that they were collecting data. I didn't want to know what the data was. I had no clearance for the data, but I knew they were working on something.
And I think that all makes sense. And just kind of, from my perspective, so you can try to understand where I'm coming from. I'm not trying to be combative or being a jerk here. I'm just thinking, obviously there's something that weird that happened. There are these things that, from your knowledge, were not of this earth. And then they formed a working group to examine that and get more information, get more data. And it seems plausible to me that that working group may have gotten additional information and might have actually been able to make sense of it. And maybe it did come from Earth, right? Like, I can't see how you can totally rule that possibility out. And that's just kind of what I'm getting at.
Right.
Is that
right? And it's reasonable to assume, because I can't tell you any more than what I know. It's just that I just know that if it was something from the Earth, it would have been eliminated a long time ago. It wouldn't have never gotten to a working group stage, because every agency was bringing to bear its resources to understand what this might have been. So you have National Security Agency. Do you have signals intelligence on any kind of strange phenomenon out in space that you've collected? NGA with its photographic capabilities, both in electro-optical and optical bands. You have DIA with its MASENT sensors in space and on the ground and in the air. You have all of these, the entire array of U.S. intelligence capabilities, as far as sensors go, were brought to bear on this issue. And they could not solve it, because when they put together the working group, it was not to figure out what it wasn't. We figured out what it wasn't prior to the working group. And when everyone was chiming in on what it wasn't, based on the expertise their agencies have, that was when the working group was decided to be formed. That we don't, okay, all these agencies piped in. We had defense contractors as well. They had Northrop Grumman, they had Lockheed Martin, they had Raytheon, they had Boeing, all the big ones. The companies that you would think, if we were building something in a black project, that they would know about. And they didn't know about it, because the folks that were briefed into the working group got everything they needed to understand what this phenomenon was, including what we fly, what everybody else flies. My understanding is that they also got information about Roswell. And the reason why I know that is because I used to have a doll looking like a gray alien, but it was, green felt. And I would fold it and put it on top of my monitor, sitting on my monitor. And when one of my engineers came by, and they knew I was interested in the entire subject matter, and he told me, everything you think you know that happened. And then he walked away. And I wouldn't say any more than that. Well, so that tells me that they went way back. They were serious about, these orbs are different. They're not cracked. These are different. This is a different entity, and why are we seeing them? And why are they here?
Were they able to estimate the size?
You're reading. Seems like you're reading a lot into that comment. That's interesting.
The why is it interesting? I'm sorry.
Well, I guess
don't know who had
someone. I guess it was just a statement for me. I think Sean, you had a question to say.
Well, I just had a quick question about whether or not they were able to estimate size on any of these orbs and whether they were uniform.
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a question actually from somebody in the audience.
That's a good question because
Dennis Bedke. Thank you, by the way, for the question.
That would mean that I think my engineers who were there probably got that kind of information. I didn't get any metrics from it other than the fact that,
Well, okay, so then let me ask you
orbs.
this. So after this group was put together and the determination of the thing that it wasn't, how did we rule out natural phenomenon? How was that rule out? Because it sounds to me as if the conclusion that was come to was this is not from Earth and it's also a technology.
Right.
So do you know how it went from, how did we rule out natural phenomenon to this? Just out of curiosity.
Well, that would be probably NGA that could do that because all we looked at were what we did prior to the working group was to look at any kind of aerodynamic possibilities for this. That is another country's aircraft.
Sounds like it's so compartmentalized where you have, one group looking at one aspect and, like you only saw one piece of data. I can only imagine that there's more data. Do you think was this all within the CIA? I mean, I know.
No.
So is there multiple agencies that were involved with this?
The working group. The working group involved all the major intelligence agencies, the military, the science and technology intelligence centers, which are more DoD oriented, the defense contractors. A lot of people got together to study this. I wasn't part of that study. I didn't want to be part of that study. Had I been part of that study, I wouldn't be appearing right now on all these podcasts because I would have been read in and I couldn't talk about the orbs or the working group at all. So obviously to me that they had more information. And so every intelligence agency has a specialty that they're responsible for. And so they went back to their specialties to see if their sources had any information about these orbs. So naturally, there's not necessarily compartmented, but specialized. And when they all got together, then they brought all of their information together. And that's when they got read in at a higher level because they created a compartment on anything they discovered by sharing all of that information and looking at what we have, what they have, looking back at all of the historical records about UFOs. They brought all that to bear. And it wasn't until then that, everyone got to know what everything else was and what everyone else knew. So they brought it together in this working group. And when they were finished and informed the DNI, that they were done. They were done because when I returned back to my office in January 2009, they were already done. That safe that I got for them was gone. So whatever materials they had in that safe was returned. So they finished. And so happens that 2008 was the start of ALSAP. So whatever that the intelligence community did on the civilian side, whether they turned that information over to ALSAP or if ALSAP was aware of what this working group was about. And I find it hard to believe that ALSAP would not know about the working group. That was from ALSAP on, that they took it over. And ALSAP looked at it from the DoD specific threat scenario, because that's what DoD does. Whereas we, and the intelligence community on the civilian side, we look at the science and technology of what something might be.
Wow. Okay. I love it. Go ahead, Sean. Sorry.
Have you ever personally laid eyes on these, or have you seen reports?
Orbs?
Yeah.
I've seen personally, I've seen orbs. Yeah.
Where were you?
Aircraft. A commercial aircraft from BWI to LAX.
Okay.
Over the Southwest. I was listening to Channel 1, United Airlines Channel 1, which back then they used to hand out these pneumatic tubes.
I remember.
Or headphones. Remember those?
Oh, yeah. Delta.
Yeah. Channel 1 was, and this was before 9/11, because after 9/11, you didn't hear cockpit comms anymore. But United Airlines used to broadcast the comms to the ground from the aircraft on Channel 1. So I was tuning into Channel 1, just listening, air traffic control, the pilot. And the pilot reported seeing an object on his port side. It's crossing in his flight path at a very fast rate. And he described it as, it looks like an orange ball. and I immediately look out. I was sitting on the starboard side, so I look up outside my window, and there it was, an orange orb. It did not shine. It was orange, but wasn't like, it's hard to describe. It just was orange. It was round.
It wasn't like glowing.
It wasn't glowing. It was just the fact of that it was just orange. And it wasn't like sparklers or anything flying off of it or like shining or sparkling. None of that. It was just a solid orange, spherical looking object that it seemed like it crossed in front of us and kept on going.
Do you remember if it was like reflective or more of a matte color?
Matte, very matte, not reflective. Absolutely not reflective.
Huh. That's really cool. Because that's evidence right there that, you have another human being who is identifying a phenomenon, an object outside of a window. You look out the window and then you see it also, right? So, those types of reports to me are really interesting because, you've got like the time we were fishing down at Lake Hartwell and we were playing around with a little CE5 thing. And all I said to the SEALs that we were hanging out with was just look straight up, guys. And then we all compared notes after the fact, and we all saw the same pattern of movement and the speed and the weirdness of the physics and yada, yada, yada. Mm-hmm. But that to me says I'm not hallucinating what I saw, or if it is an hallucination, it's a group hallucination, at which point it gets super interesting because, how are we connecting with the same visual phenomenon through non-local consciousness or whatever to be able to see the same thing. But I love that kind of a sighting because, you've got a confirmation that somebody else saw that same thing that you saw out the same side of the craft.
Right. And the ground asked the cockpit whether they wanted to report it, and the cockpit declined. No, we don't want to report this.
That was back in the days when airline pilots were sent through a psych eval if they reported a UFO, right?
I guess so, but they did not want to report this at all.
Yeah, there was a time where people got grounded for a while until they got their wings back.
I had a question for you, Sean, because I know you said you've had experiences as a younger person. Does your experience match John's in that you saw the craft as well before you saw the entities, or was it a different kind of experience? I mean, do you care to elaborate, or you don't talk about it?
No, I mean, there was a time that my first experience of weirdness that I can't explain was 3 glowing white lights. And my dad and I saw them, and they were absolutely silent, and they were just over treetop level. And he stopped the truck in the middle of the road and got out to look. It was like that weird, because he was an ex bomber pilot from World War II. And so he's had a long number of hours in the first seat of flying B-17s, B-29s, and, a large number of flight hours. He was a civilian pilot until his later days. And so he'd seen all kinds of craft, military and non-military. And this was something that piqued his interest so much that he had to stop the truck in the middle of the road at night on the way home from baseball. I think we went out for ice cream after we won a baseball game or something like that. It was after dark in the fall. And so he got out and told me to stay in the truck. Of course, I didn't. And so that was really interesting that there was no rotor wash. It wasn't helicopters with, searchlights on or anything like that. It was right above the trees, and they were not moving at the speed of aerodynamic aircraft that they would need to remain aloft, right? So that was a really interesting experience. That up until we had a couple conversations late into his life about that night, where we both experienced the same thing, and all he could come up with was, "Yeah, I don't know what that was," and that's all he would say about it, which was really interesting. But because we got to I will say this, I really want to get into some kind of a hypnosis or something to try and recall the details of that night, because I don't remember. I have a pretty good memory about things that I experienced, and I have a memory where I remember my first birthday party, and I remember speaking to my mom, saying something at my 6-month checkup where the doctor literally almost got himself whiplashed by whipping around so quick and asking, "Is that baby talking?" And so I remember those things, and I remember certain experiences really well. And it seems like this one, I don't have a great recall. So I want to try to trigger some kind of a memory refresh and figure out what exactly happened that night. But it was pretty interesting. But that was my first time of seeing something that I couldn't explain, and that was just kind of weird. And that my dad and I just didn't talk for the rest of the ride home after that, because he was kind of spooked, I guess. And my dad just doesn't get spooked, right? I mean, I come from a family where my uncle was a recipient of the Silver Star in World War II and was put up for the Congressional Medal of Honor, and his Coxhole buddy got the Congressional Medal of Honor. It's one of 100 and some odd folks who actually survived to wear it. And they can talk about anything, and with an open mind, and with a curiosity. And this topic was just something that my dad never spoke about with me. And the only time I asked him about it, he would say, "Yeah, I don't know what that was." And then that would be at the end of the conversation.
And so I guess that means there was no other experiences he's had as a pilot that he shared with you then?
No.
That would match that one.
I mean, I assume that would be the case, because he never, he would tell me all kinds of stories about how he would get in trouble in flight training, and they would fly under power lines, and they would go bounce the wheels of their trainers off of boxcars on long trains out in the Southwest, and all kinds of trouble that he got into. So he was a hellraiser, certainly. And he was that Top Gun Maverick type of pilot, that million miles an hour with his hair on fire type of dude. And this is something that he just was silent on, and just wouldn't speak about when we brought it up.
And did you have any experiences past that one, or is that one the first one that you particularly remember?
That's the first one I remember. I've seen some other things, and lately I've seen a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And of course we played with some CE5 attempts, and have gotten activity, and there's been some really interesting stuff that has happened in the last
What kind of activity? Orbs? I feel like the CE5 brings on the orbs, just saying.
Yeah, John, have you ever done CE5? Have you ever tried that?
CE6.
Okay.
That's a variation of the theme by Mark Sims, where he uses radios tuned to a certain frequency, and somehow he transmits data that's been modulated in some way. I don't know. I have to ask him what his source of data is, but it's almost like he takes something like a crop circle or something and then translates that into tones. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah, no, he was on the show. He explained it to us, and it was difficult for me to understand. I know there was a radio involved, and there was other sets of equipment where they would pump these signals back at them, and then they're recording. I mean, we've had him on the show a couple times, and he gets these things on camera all the time, and it's like, it's still very difficult to comprehend and believe. Even someone as myself who's had an experience. We talked about this the other day when we had Preston Dennett on. Like these concepts, these ideas are very difficult in some cases to comprehend as a reality or a possible reality. So yeah, I mean it's wild. See, okay, yeah. So I mean, what did you? I know rather you when we had that CE6 conversation. What were your thoughts on it? It's been a while since we talked about that, but
Yeah, I mean, yeah, seems pretty out there to me. I mean, maybe there's something to it. I know that he was gonna get us all into the desert and do a little contact tour for us, but I think that Mark Sims kind of dropped the ball on that. I'd still love to go.
I don't think it was Mark. It was it's Tyler Zaranda,
Aaron Descario,
who invited us. It was just I haven't been able to do the trip only because we can't take Michelle on a camping trip yet because my girlfriend had a terrible accident over the summer. And so she's still getting back to normal life. And so that's not out of the woods yet, rather. We may still do that. But it does kind of speak, and Gary Voorhees is in the chat in the show, of sort of a little bit of kind of what UAPX is doing and how they're getting equipment and recording things that they're very, very excited to talk about. And I think orbs is something that is in that discussion. So I hope that rather hopes that he's wrong, because Stephen Greenstreet says the same thing today. Like, I hope, we have to stay skeptical. We have to push the questions as far as we can, but I hope my skepticism is wrong at the end of the day. That's what I hope. And I think you think the same thing too, right?
Yeah, how amazing would that be if we could call him up on the radio? Yeah, I'd love that.
That would be insane. Okay, so we've got some questions from the audience for John and I think also for Sean. And if you guys have any questions, please throw them in the chat. Sean, were you going to say something? Did I cut you off?
Yeah, well, I just wanted one follow-up question. What was the result of your CE6 experiment, John?
Yeah.
Yes. So it occurred on my birthday, July 14th, as part of one of Mark Sims's sponsored weeks. I forget what it was called. Something Convergence 2020.
Yeah, the Convergence. Yeah. I can't remember.
And so we were out in a balcony. My wife and I were out in a balcony. It was already dark here in Arizona. It was like 9, quarter after 9, thereabouts. And Mark started his transmission off of one radio. To me, it sounded like digital noise. I couldn't make any sense of it. And then he started chanting this HU or Hugh. And my wife is a singer, so she can chant along. And we did that for like 10 minutes. And then we went into meditation and keeping our eyes open, but, just calming our minds and kind of separate. It's easy to do if you meditate. You kind of separate yourself from your corporeal body.
Yeah.
And you reach in. And you can feel the presence within. Mm-hmm. Some people call it a soul. Let's say it's a soul, but you reach in. And looking up about 9:25 thereabouts, I looked up and there was this bright white orb. It just blinked in, I say. It blinked in. It was there for several seconds and then blinked out. And during this time, I've always asked any kind of phenomena I don't understand. I always ask it questions like, what, do you have a message for me? What is your message? Why are you appearing before me? And the message came back saying that you have things that that you need to share. Now is the time to share those things. Wow. And that you're here to help one person with questions that person has. That person has had these questions over a lifetime. You will meet that person. You don't know who it is yet. You will meet that person and you will have a dialogue and a communication and a friendship with that person. And so that's happened. And so both things happen. So I'm sharing what I know, what I've experienced with everyone else. So
was that person rather?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
He still needs more work.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna get to a couple questions from our audience here, John, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Mr. Jason Ladd, not a question, but just says, "Thank you for letting experiencers have a voice on the show." No problem. I mean, it's something that we're trying to dive into more and understand better. And we get, it's so funny. It's like, why don't you let experiencers talk? And then we let them talk, and then we question it and we try to understand it as best we can. It's like, why do you question it? Why? It's like, well, you can't have it both ways. Like, we're trying to understand it. This is literally the process of trying to understand what might be going on past just seeing it. Because if here's the rabbit hole that is very dangerous. You do see one, and now you've confirmed for yourself, okay, well, if that's real, what else is real? What else goes along with this that I'm seeing? So be patient with us. We're trying to navigate through this as best we can, and I know sometimes it's frustrating for you guys as experiencers, but just understand we share your frustration. Sometimes it's frustrating for us as non-experiencers to digest this information. So we appreciate you, John, and you guys in the chat or watching the show or listening to the show for joining us for this ride. Camp F. Moipetir, thank you for the donation or the question, excuse me, says, I would like to know John's take on the CIA's last resort of losing files to avoid the whole FOIA, as it was recently indicated by John Greenwald. Kind of kills the whole FOIA idea, in my opinion. Thank you.
I don't know how to address that. I wouldn't be surprised if they can't find every single darn document in the building. They're trying to digitize as many documents as possible. And having said that, unless it's a record, we really don't have to keep it. Certain things are records that we need to keep. Other things are not records, and it goes into the burn bag. But if this was a record, I'm surprised that they can no longer retrieve that record at all. So I can't address that, why they lost a record or misplaced it. I don't think it's any kind of nefarious thing. I think it's just basically there's a lot of paper in that building that needs to be accounted for, and not all of it's digitized. That's just why I made mention of the historical intelligence collection, which has a lot of that old paper there. And they were trying to digitize the entire historical intelligence collection. Significance of that is that's where Chase Brandon, who wrote Crypto's Conundrum, he claimed that he saw the Roswell files at CIA headquarters in that historical intelligence collection. And no one's seen those files since. People have looked for those files, my understanding is, and they could not find those files. So that's why I'm trying to find Chase Brandon, because if there's anyone I want to talk to, it's Chase Brandon. Because even the briefing I got in that hotel conference room, they didn't say anything about Roswell at all. They just started with McMinnville. Here it is. So for some reason, Roswell is never a topic that the government wants to bring up.
Do you think that there's a separation between the UFO phenomenon and the technology of craft that can do weird things and the admission that alien life exists? Because a lot of people are still in the boat that, oh yeah, it could be a UFO craft, but that doesn't mean aliens, right? It could be drones, it could be competitive technology that we're unaware of, it could be XYZ, but it doesn't mean aliens, right? Do you think there's a big line of demarcation there that this conversation can be had at this point, but they don't even want to touch the implications of something like this, where ET could actually exist?
I know for a fact that there was a report written by CIA, the historian of the CIA, documenting what the agency did with UFOs from 47 to 90. And in that document, which I read the unclassified, unredacted version, I don't know what's out there is the same version. I think there are parts of it missing that I kind of remember I read. But in that document, the author, the historian, said that the CIA studied UFOs in these two offices, Office of Scientific Intelligence, Office of Scientific and Weapons Research, in the Life Sciences Division. The Life Sciences Division was where biological intelligence, neurological intelligence, they were all scientists who studied the body and the effects of the body. So this is where remote viewing was studied, for example, because it had to do with some aspect of the mind. So the fact that UFOs were studied in a division that dealt with physiology, psychology, leads me to believe that CIA had knowledge of the bodies. Otherwise, why study them in life sciences? There were other divisions like dealt with aerospace vehicles, space systems. They didn't do the UFO work, it was life sciences. So that's just circumstantial. I admit that is just completely circumstantial.
Yeah.
But I found it interesting that life sciences, that's where the study of UFOs at CIA occurred in the classic era, let's say.
Yeah, that might explain the difference between being able to talk about or being willing to talk about McMinnville, where a crash didn't occur. Somebody saw something. Somebody had a physical picture with a negative back in the days of when that technology existed, where you could look at it and see if it was tampered with, et cetera, and it hasn't been. That's one instance of something they could talk about where there wasn't any alien bodies, right? But if you're talking about Roswell, well, do we want to tell the whole story, or do we want to tell half the story where we crashed? Well, okay, was there anybody in there? We're going to have to stop talking now, right? I mean,
well, because it's also, and sorry, Sean, just so related to that. Also, it's like with the saucers are associated with the gray aliens, Roswell, very, iconically, right? And then John, I think that in the briefing, you said they were about the hybrids. Did they refer to reptilians?
No, they look like us because we are the hybrids. Okay. That's basically their message.
Did you hear about any particular type of ET species that was behind it?
But,
okay, so it's completely
right. The beings that I see in my experiences have been more saurian, as I say. Because when I say reptilian, they think of like dinosaurs, bipedal dinosaurs. They're not like the lizards running around my backyard right now, walking around on 2 feet. They're not bipedal lizards. They're like beings that originated from a saurian bloodline, like we originated from a primate. But we don't look anything like the primates at the zoo or in the wild, and they don't look like anything like the lizards running around in our deserts. They're more highly evolved, but that message I got was that's who they are, that they're saurians. And so I always resonated with the saurians. And I had to speculate because there's so many like reptilian type creatures on National Reconnaissance Office launch vehicles using official logos and patches that you can wear on your jacket of like dragons and like reptilians encircling the earth and whatnot. I don't know what that message is, but I put two and two together as saying like, gosh, why would the NRO put this kind of disturbing imagery on one of their spy satellites going on one of their spy rockets launching a spy satellite? Is there a saurian kind of nexus with some of the beings that we see? And then you go back to some of the experiencers in the MyLabs experience, and they report seeing saurians or reptilians with people in uniform. So I've experienced saurians personally, and I'm wondering if it was their DNA that was incorporated into us, because they did say that we discovered that humans have alien DNA, and some have a special type of alien DNA. And we are interested in studying those people as well, especially those people.
And when did you experience the saurians?
All throughout my life.
Okay.
all through. These are the experiences I had.
What was the latest experience you've had?
Latest was here in Tucson, and it was about shortly after I moved here from Charlotte, North Carolina. And one came at night, and I woke up. As far as I know, I was awake. I looked up, and it was just running around, just walking around. And it looked at me and said, "Oh, don't worry. We know you moved. We just want to let you know that we found you. Don't worry about it."
How long ago was
You're
this?
fine. This was like a year ago.
Wow.
That's very cool.
So that's the type of experiences that I've had. They kind of tend to leave me alone.
Yeah. I don't want to dig into a minor detail, but the patches I find is kind of interesting, and how you drew the conclusion that they're showing these reptilian images on the mission patches. Therefore, you think that might be kind of tipping the hat to what they're studying and what's behind this. Can you give any other examples of where potential very secret classified information was kind of their hat tipped with a mission patch? It seems counterintuitive that they would want to do that, at least to my civilian perspective.
Well, originally my briefing when I did it first in 2016 was called Hidden in Plain Sight. And I included some of those mission patches in that original briefing that appeared at the end of my current presentation. And my point was that there are a lot of things the government lets on that is literally in plain sight, but it's so startling when you see it that your mind doesn't grasp the meaning of it. And those patches were an example of that. Those logos on the fairing of
was there anything like
vehicles.
an atom on the Manhattan Project? You think that they had patches that would hint towards what they are doing?
I don't know, because this is so far-fetched that you can do something like that. And I said, they're into Dungeons and Dragons. Who cares, But the other time I saw a dragon or a reptilian was the official. It was a I don't know if it's a logo, but the Directorate of Science and Technology, one of the directorates in the CIA, had a DS&T, or Directorate of Science and Technology Academy, and their logo was a black reptilian on their logo. And it's one of the things I tossed in the burn bag. I threw so many things in the burn bag that I should have maybe squirreled out of the building. But that wasn't classified. I could have taken it home.
Yeah, I've been through the
pin it up.
Oh, go ahead. I've been through the patch creation process. I've been through the patch creation process a couple times. Got long lost life memories. I used to be in the Navy, so I've seen how the patch process worked, at least where I was. And usually you just ask all the people in the project to come up with some sketches and some ideas that, they, with no artistic ability at all, draw up based on, what their feeling is that their mission is. And, they try to create visual representation of what they're doing. And then you throw it over to somebody who has some artistic talent to actually draw up the patch after somebody, everybody agrees. So you're counting on two different things. One, if you're in a super classified project, you're drawing a patch that's never going to be seen by anybody except for the folks who are drawing it and wearing it. And it's usually as a morale activity, a group identification activity more than anything else. But I mean, these folks are basically just kind of drawing what they think the project is about. And so, if there's a patch out there that's got some interesting reptilian creatures surrounding the Earth, I mean, that's going to be a reflection of what the people in the program thought the program was about.
Yeah, and some of those NRO launches, I know the payload inside of them, and that is something I can't reveal. So I know what it flew.
I mean, based off that, sorry.
And so, yeah, I don't know what it seems like. When I looked at those logos and those patches, it seems like we have complete control over the Earth. And whether the NRO thinks they're reptilians or not, it's like no matter where you are, we can find you. We have complete control over the Earth. And that's the message I got from all of these like reptilian creatures. They're like embracing the Earth or sitting on top of the Earth or doing something with the Earth there. And so I don't know if that's a message or not, but it's not like a secret because all the NRO launches are public now. And some of the logos are very innocent. One of them was like a teddy bear, nothing wrong with a teddy bear on a NRO launch vehicle. So
Well, it sounds
You don't
almost
think
a
that
little
means
bit.
that might be, really cute bears that are ruling us all?
yeah, who knows?
There's a hidden Care Bear faction in Iraq that we need to take out. But I mean, just based off of Sean's description there, it just sounds like somebody. It could have been, a reptilian sort of link, or it could have just been somebody in the office being like, "Let's put a fucking dragon on it.
Yeah, let's
put a dragon on it, man.
Right.
The dragons rule.
Are cool.
Right.
Dragons are cool. I mean, there
Right.
are roller coasters and whole shows based around dragons.
Right. And so the U2, the original U2 was nicknamed the Dragon Lady by CIA. And so the existence of a dragon on a reconnaissance platform is nothing new. I mean, they were putting it on the U2 long before there were satellites. So it could be a nod to that. I don't know.
Yeah.
But again, if you recall, that slide had a lot of questions, and I put question marks up, and I posed every bullet as a question because I'm not saying it's definitive or anything like that.
Right. You're just giving your opinion based off of what you know.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's get to a couple more questions here in the chat. Carl the Crusher, thank you, my friend, for the question. Does he think that orbs are different than, and he meaning you, John, I believe, think are different than physical exotic craft or a manifestation from a physical craft like an energy exhaust?
Well, yes, I think they're orbs of light energy because that's what we saw, orbs of light energy. About 600 nanometers, orange. They weren't like solid objects. And so when you have eyewitnesses of orbs today, people who are civilians seeing orbs come into their lives, they all say it's nothing solid. It's just light.
And a full military afterburner would be showing blue as well. I mean, you'd have the orange of the superheated structure on the inside of the jet engine that you could see out of the back of the aircraft, but you also got a blue tinge as well.
In fact, when I saw the orange orb out of the United Airlines flight, that was the first thing I thought. It's got to be a jet engine. And until I kept looking at it, and there was no jet in front of it. I mean, there was no jet. I mean, it was literally following us for a while before it receded. It kept up with the plane. And we're going, what 580 miles per hour at about 35,000 feet, because we're still far from LAX. And so
you didn't have a chat with a pilot on the way out?
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, when you work at CIA, you see strange stuff. I mean, there's all kinds of strange stuff to look at, and things didn't dawn on me until many years later when I regretted not keeping things I could have kept that were unclassified. I could have taken them out of the building because they're unclassified. All I wanted to do is get the hell out of there on my last day because they were putting me to work. And I said, sorry, I can't do this project because I'm retiring in 5 minutes. I literally had a briefing 30 minutes before I retired. Within that hour to 30 minutes before I retired, I was doing a briefing, showing slides to an audience in a conference room. And one of the guys said, hey, we want you to work on our project since you have this experience from I go, sorry, I'm retiring in 5 minutes. Get somebody else. I'm gone. And I walked out of that building with nothing.
Do you regret walking out of that building with nothing?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Because when you walk out of a building, a job like that, burden is lifted off your shoulders. You can feel a palatable burden being lifted off my shoulders. I decided I never wanted a clearance ever again.
Wow. So you were happy to be retired.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I feel like I'm not retired because I feel like I'm back at work again.
You're doing all these shows.
Well, we appreciate it, though. We appreciate your time and that you're sharing your stories and relating what you know. Because, I mean, we do think it's important that people who can handle the truth, at least, do get snapshots of what may exist and be able to take that into consideration. And they're putting together their snapshots of their reality.
Interviewers ask the wrong kind of questions. If you want to get a straight answer, ask a question that requires just a yes or no. Don't ask Lou to explain something. Just ask him outright. Is there such thing? Is there such thing as alien DNA? Is there such thing as implants? Is there such thing as orbs? He would not lie to you at all. He might deflect it with, I can't talk about it. That's fine. But he will not lie to you. If they don't exist, he would say no. If they do exist and he can't talk about it, he will not say yes. He will just not answer the question.
Well, Lou has been pretty, Lou Elizondo has been pretty straightforward that he doesn't think that the government actually knows what's going on, right? Like he stated very many times that they don't know, they don't have a handle on it.
What he's saying is that there's no consensus as to what's going on, and there are many opinions.
Let me ask you,
there are factions with different opinions of what's going on, but there's no consolidated story you can tell a policymaker from the committee that oversees the information, which Lou is a part of informing that committee. This committee is more higher placed than any of us. And their job is to inform the policymakers. And so those guys, they're still debating amongst themselves as to what is going on. So he's correct in that there's no concise answer ever given to a policymaker of what's going on. And until the policymaker understands the full gamut of what's going on, including the orbs, including the craft, including all these experiences, they're not going to say anything, which is why I believe that an opportunity to explain things might come when the James Webb Space Telescope might see something that requires an explanation from the scientific side. So I think the scientific side is going to be the way to get into the classified side.
Do you think the military-industrial complex knows more than the military in some aspects? I mean, we certainly know that they know more than Congress and the public representation that we put in office has. Those guys seem to be the last to know everything. Do you think that there's a kind of a cabal that has taken some of this technology or not shared the full aspects of what's going on inside these classified projects, that they're not sharing back with the military, that maybe we've lost control of this stuff? Because that was one of the things that Truman talked about on his way out as well.
Yeah.
Right. Or Eisenhower, sorry.
Yeah, that's called top cover, as you know,
Right.
Sean, top cover. And it's backstopped, you know that term as well.
Mm-hmm.
It gives plausible deniability to public policymakers. When they're asked something, they can say, oh, I don't know what's going on. They won't tell me. Right.
But do you think that's happening with the military as well? Like there are people in the Pentagons that maybe
I'll
not.
give you an example. There was a classified program in the Navy, and we had something called the Intelligence Community Architecture Working Group, another working group I was a member of. And in it were dozens and dozens of representatives from all branches of the service and all intelligence community members. And I represented the National Counterproliferation Center for the ODNI at the time. There was a program that was Navy. I knew it was Navy. I wasn't read into it, but I knew it was Navy, and I knew it was highly compartmented, that very few people knew about. There was a Navy officer. She was sitting there. She was an 06. So it's not like a junior officer, an 06, fourth striper.
Right.
And she raised her hand saying, what is this program about? and it was a Navy program. And there she was in uniform, 4 stripes,
Oh.
and asking about a Navy compartmented program. And somebody else who was not in the Navy, a civilian, turned around and said, "Oh, that's a Navy program." And she was so embarrassed.
Wow.
So there's an example of, yeah, there could be parts of the Pentagon not knowing what the other parts of the Pentagon are doing. And that was one of my slides, that there are things going on in these intelligence community agencies where, I mean, you don't know what's going on inside your own agency. And especially if it involves money, because then you get into like turf wars over money, and you want to hide your money, and you hide your money by hiding your program. And so you may not brief everyone. Aside from the security aspects, you know, there's like stovepiping going on that the DNI is responsible for breaking down. They've been trying to break down these stovepipes. But as you know, funding is everything. Now, as far as Congress not knowing, I don't believe that in a millisecond. There's these Defense Subcommittee of the House Armed Services Committee. There's the House Appropriations, the Defense Subcommittee of the House Appropriations Committee. House Appropriations pays for all of these programs, right? And the Defense Subcommittee is read into the fact of that these programs exist in some high level.
Mm-hmm.
So even if it's like a highly compartmented SAP program, it needs to have money, and they need to know how much money it is. So they may not get the full scope of the program, but they'll know it exists. Now, to answer your question, suppose a program is completely over into the proprietary contractor side. At that point, government is hands off, and we don't know anything about what that program is doing, or we shouldn't. And they can't take one dime of the government's money, because once they take government's money, we have oversight over their program, and they know it. So they'll do it on their own, and they'll trot it out after they come up with a partial solution, or they want to demonstrate something. Oh, look what we've been doing, you know, in our spare time with our own RD&E funds, research development engineering funds. This is what we've been doing. And then, oh, are you interested in funding it?
Right.
And that's when the government knows, you know, so that does occur as well.
Yeah, I have concerns about that whole model because, you know, you go out and you spend a bunch of money in the desert. You know, some estimates are $6 trillion on a war that wouldn't have cost $6 trillion. You charge a whole bunch of money to set up your Pizza Huts and to run manufacturing, and you run your construction, and you run your cleanup, and shutting off all the wells that were on fire in Iraq, and yada, yada, yada. You charge all this money over the top, and then you put it into R&D on something that you don't have to report back to the government.
Yeah.
I have super big concerns about, you know, if a rogue element in military industrial arena isn't, you know, trying to build bases that are not on the earth and not reporting them. And, you know, because I mean, that's a huge power trip at that point. It's like, you know, oh, you want to pull me over? Well, how about if I just fly up to the moon and see if you can give me a ticket up there? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And it would be more in the industrial side, because once you add the military side, someone knows something about it. And it could be compartmented. It could be very deeply compartmented where very few people know. But there are levels of compartmentation. And like most people would know the fact of that such a program exists. And it won't be bases on the moon. It'll be couched in some other language.
Yeah.
But they know that a certain amount of money is being spent on a black project, and it has this name. So if you look at ALSAP and ATIP, if you break out what ALSAP and ATIP stood for, there's nothing in there that says UAP. There's nothing in there that says a high strangeness at Skinwalker Ranch or anything like that. Yet, you know, we know that it involved high strangeness at Skinwalker Ranch. It involved like UAPs. It involved like all of that, but it's not in the title. But somebody can fund it that way and not even know exactly what that program's doing.
Right.
So I worked on programs like that, where it was couched as the truth, but it was so broad that you can't focus on any particular thing in that program. And when you get read into it, you get read into deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper until you get the entire program. And the people who are actually involved in it, like for me, it was a technical collection operation involved in a foreign country, that I knew all the details of the program, including how it was funded and how we got people over there, how we got our equipment over there, because I was traveling for that program and I needed to operate that gear when I got there. So I knew exactly where the bases were, and I knew exactly what was there, and I got all of that. But higher up, they just know, oh, there's a special technical collection operation going on by CIA, and that's all we know. And it costs this much money.
So you said you know where the bases are. So NCloud had a $4.99 super chat and a question about what do you think about UAPs under our oceans. They're also curious about the Colares Brazil case, if you'd heard of that. But you know, when you talk about reptilians, I go to like, oh, could they be from planet Earth, right? And then I go to under the ocean. And so what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, when I said I know where the bases are, I was referring to a terrestrial collection operation, not anything.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I was segueing a little bit. I segued a little bit too much.
Those are completely terrestrial programs,
yes.
right? I'm collecting signals overseas. But it's interesting under the oceans how the Navy has been involved with this somehow from the very beginning. It seems unusual to me that a service that is on the water would have any interest in what's in space. So it got to the point where the Navy actually launched spy satellites. They launched some of the first spy satellites. The Navy did. The Navy, of all people, not the Air Force, the Navy. They launched spy satellites from the very beginning, disguised as scientific geophysical satellites, scientific satellites. And so the Navy has been involved. Now, the Navy has something that none of the other services have, submarines. They go under the water. They map what's underneath the water. It's important to them to map what's underneath the water because they're mapping places to hide their submarines. When a fleet ballistic missile submarine goes out, it doesn't just patrol the oceans. It goes to a point and hovers and stays because it's their mission to stay at a certain location. If they're needed, they need to launch missiles. It has to be accurate. They have to hover over a certain period, over a certain place in space, in the ocean. They don't like move around like fast attacks. And so they know a lot about what's going on underneath the ocean. The one program that did not get read into was a Navy compartment. Absolutely did not get read into it. The control officer at CIA dealing with the Pentagon told me that the Pentagon said that you will never be read into this program. Like, you will not be read into this program. We cannot have you in this program. And I go, why not? I know all this. I got 26 compartments. Why not number 27? They said, no, absolutely not. And I went to the ODNI, and at the ODNI, I got read into some more programs because I'm at the ODNI and I got to see a lot more information about what we can deploy as far as collection systems go, highly compartmented collection systems, and I got read into more. Still, when it came to that Navy program, they said, no, we're not reading you in. And I was walked out of a conference because they were talking about aspects of that program the Navy had, and as security, they walked me out, saying, you can't be here because we're going to talk about this and you don't have any clearances to know about this. So I have no idea. It's intriguing what the Navy knows. Yeah. The Navy knows a lot.
Yeah.
So, John, we've got a few questions here, and I want to try and get through as many as we can. So the first is from Event Tide. He asked, would love for John, if he could elaborate on what sort of formations that they were seeing, shape, duration, etc.
So it was a frame of imagery. It's not video that I saw. It was a frame of imagery, a snapshot. Infrared snapshot. So what he saw were orbs, and they weren't in any kind of triangular formation or any kind of organized formation. They were just there.
Okay.
Not in a formation that I would call like the triangular formation. A lot of people see the triangles. Like they're flying.
I thought you said that they were flying in formation and like
they were flying in formation, but they were flying together. In other words, they weren't like randomly scattered, but they stayed randomly scattered and station keeping.
So you had multiple frames of image.
Multiple frames of imagery. Okay. So it wasn't like It wasn't like they were all like doing their own thing. That pattern, it's a pattern. I should say, instead of formation, it's a pattern that I would call a formation that stayed as a pattern.
Okay.
But you look at it, it seems like they're randomly scattered.
Okay.
Carl, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, you see other.
No, I've seen photographs submitted by eyewitnesses on the ground, civilians, that show these orbs in a similar kind of like non-formation, but still a pattern that stay together.
Got it. Carl Crusher asks, can you discuss the sightings that appear like flying humanoid figures and shapes that look like suit or entity or unusual types, odd or geometric shapes? Thank you for the great show.
Yeah, I don't know what to say about them because I haven't seen it myself and I've never had no information about anything like that.
Okay, that's fine. Naive Essence with a question. What are your thoughts on ESP and remote viewing, and how does it relate to the orbs phenomena? Could it possibly be consciousness traveling?
Definitely, I think there's some there is some consciousness aspect to the orbs. In fact, Dr. Greer, in his documentary, mentioned that the government got excited when they discovered these orbs were of higher consciousness. Now, a lot of people discount what Dr. Greer says, but when I heard that, when I saw this on his documentary, I was just floored because that's essentially correct. That this idea that it has something to do with consciousness might be one of those high strangeness things that the government cannot explain.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, it'd be safe to say, though, you know, if we're creatures with physical form that are somehow wired into consciousness, such as, you know, the things we talked about in the last time I was on the show with the potentially the phosphorus atoms being entangled or the microtubules of our neurons interacting with quantum field vibrations as proven in Tsukuba, Japan in 2014, it would be silly to assume that we were the only entity that was hardwired into consciousness. And at the point that you're hardwired into a non-local field, then, you know, limitations of distance are off the table. They're no longer in play. Limitations of time and temporal limitations are no longer in play. So, you know, it'd be safe to assume that if other entities do exist and they are visiting or have lived here or whatever the situation of the millions of potential shades of gray to explain that phenomenon are, it would be silly to assume that they're not also tapped into that same type of non-local field, at which point the field is one thing. And if you're tapped into it and they are tapped into it, there are no lines of delineation regarding limitations of communication or that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Almost sounds like a Wi-Fi signal.
Yeah, pretty much. A Wi-Fi signal that goes all the way across the universe and is one thing. There's no limitation of distance or time variance, etc.
All right, let me move on to the next question just because we're running out of time, gentlemen. I appreciate it. Mr. Calhoun asks, what are John's thoughts on prehistoric cataclysms, lost civilizations, and genetic boosting of our ancestors' cognitive abilities?
Well, these are just personal thoughts. But the only thing I can think of is the asteroid that allegedly destroyed all of the dinosaurs on the planet after a period of time. And there's stories of the Great Flood as well, or some cataclysm like the Great Flood that appears in various narratives of various civilizations that have been written about. Sumerians wrote about something like that. And it's in the Bible, Noah and the Great Flood. And there are probably other stories like that. So obviously something happened in the past that was of such dramatic impact that it was told and retold that this had occurred. And as far as any kind of enhancement, I think that might be where CIA was going with it, that that humans evolved from an alien DNA intervention into the human genome. And so people said, well, we didn't discover the human genome until 1990, or we didn't sequence it all the way. But then I go, yeah, that's true. But I'm wondering, speculation, if we do have the bodies and we did do the final, looking at the genome, did we go back and check what their genome might have looked like? And is that when we discovered that, oh my gosh, they're like, what's in them is in us? I don't know. I'm speculating because that briefing happened a decade after the entire genomic sequence was done. So they had 10 years by the time I heard about alien DNA to when the actual science occurred for that. And again, I go back, Life Sciences Division. Why are UFO craft studied at Life Sciences Division unless it wasn't exactly the craft that the CIA was interested in? That's speculation too, but it's life sciences.
This question is either for Sean or John, and it asks about beings of light being supposedly seen by the Bledsoe family. Have either one of you seen this phenomenon of beings of light?
I haven't. My understanding is that the Bledsoes have seen apparitions or faces in these light orbs. That they may have been alien. I believe there's one where it was a dog belonging to the Bledsoe family that had passed, and the dog was there. So I don't. That's part of the phenomenon. It's hard to explain. I don't know enough about it.
That's fair.
I don't know if the phenomenon reaches into our minds and say, I want to communicate with you. What image can I use in your mind that will make me look more friendly to you or something like that? I don't know if that's what's occurring, but apparently they have seen what looked like a classic gray head or some non-human head inside one of these orbs.
Sean, I'll let you take a crack at this question. And this question is, do the guests have any thoughts on near-death experiences or personal theories about an afterlife?
Sure. If you're one of the vast majority of the world who believes in some type of higher power and that you have some type of immortality that will survive beyond the body, it would be hubris to think that that existence started with your physical manifestation here on the planet and that it wasn't in existence before you. That's a very egoic position to take, right? That your body is your end all be all. And of course, if you believe that your body is not your end all be all, that you're going to exist past that manifestation, then you don't believe that your body is the end all be all. So there's a little bit of an oxymoronic positioning to say that your spirit starts here and then continues on into whatever exists, whatever your belief system is after your body quits. So to say that it didn't exist beforehand, or that consciousness isn't a phenomenon that is beyond the body itself and not a fundamental portion of a substrata of physics itself, is a little silly in my eyes. Of course, everybody's entitled to their opinion, and a lot of skeptics out there will try to say that consciousness is an emergent property of the brain, although the science is showing us more and more that that argument is going to have to probably be buried for the other argument that says consciousness is everywhere at all times and is fundamental to physics, collapsing wave functions, etc. Now, a data structure within that consciousness, if you're talking about an intelligent reactionary force that from a very specific definition of consciousness is able to have a defined existence and be able to operate and react to in an intelligent way to occurrences outside of that line of demarcation, then you have to take into consideration that NDEs are potentially a phenomenon where your consciousness within your body itself accesses that larger scope consciousness that exists beyond the body itself, right? So near-death experiences or out-of-body experiences or astral projection or remote viewing. As Joe McMoneagle showed us, could be super successful in intelligence capacity. I'm sorry?
Even dreaming, lucid dreaming is probably a level of that, is what I would suggest. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you're into the fact that, you may have a consciousness that extends beyond your body, all of those things become possible, even though skeptics hate to talk about that kind of stuff. I mean, we have scientific proof that, we do have ESP and we can have precognitive abilities to be able to look into the future, as we discussed last time with the Six Sigma science that we discussed about the priming agent being put beyond the task that you're supposed to take into consideration, and then the primer actually affects how you've performed the task, even though you performed the task before the priming agent was given to you. Right? We have science that proves that we reach out beyond our body in our consciousness. So I think all of that stuff is certainly on the table and can certainly, I mean, if it's there for us and we're connected into consciousness in that way, it's certainly going to be there for other living creatures as well, including animals. Like, you have connections with animals on a non-verbal communication paradigm, right? So why wouldn't you be able to have that with other intelligent creatures?
That makes sense. John, this next question's for you. And it says, what does John think about Bob Lazar's story? And has he ever seen or heard anything about S4?
I first heard about Bob Lazar from Coast to Coast AM, and also from the interview he gave on Coast to Coast AM. And so I was at CIA at the time. And so since we always discuss Coast to Coast AM around the lunch table with my friends, we thought it was a very unusual story because we couldn't quite understand what we knew about Area 51 being a site where they will be working on such craft. I'll put it that way. There is a Site 4. It's part of the Tonopah Test Range and in Nevada. And the Site 4 there, actually, I believe there's a radar there as part of that test range. I was at another test range, the Electronic Combat Range at Tolicha Peak. And so they would fly aircraft from Tonopah to Tolicha Peak, and we would use various sensors to detect these craft. I'll say that much. And it's a place where we can test what we believe to be representations of foreign air defense systems. And so the Air Force would fly their craft, and then we would then detect the aircraft and analyze how effective a foreign air defense system might be against that aircraft in terms of developing countermeasures and tactics and so forth. But there is a Site 4 north of that electronic combat range that I was at called Tonopah Test Range. That's the only Site 4 I've heard of. As far as being part of Area 51, I don't know. But then again, I've never been to Area 51. When I talked to people who have been to Area 51, they were very unimpressed with what they saw at Area 51. These were engineers in a companion office, and their job was to study exotic aircraft systems. And so what they saw, they said they were completely unimpressed. But they didn't say anything about saucers or aliens or anything like that. So that's the only answer I can give.
No, that's
fair. There is a Site 4, Tonopah Test Range, Site 4.
Yeah, you just don't know if it's on Area 51 or not. Right. Okay. Grant Levac said, I think this is a pretty simple question to answer because I don't think you can, but I'm curious to know what you guys think. How does science benefit and advance from compartmentalization?
It doesn't.
It doesn't, right? I mean, I feel like that'd be very difficult.
Yeah, science doesn't benefit at all from compartmentalization. Security certainly does. Intelligence, the security aspect of intelligence does, right? Because I mean, the whole idea of splitting things up is that if you have a human failure or a leak, that they don't know too much to be able to damage a large scale project. But science doesn't benefit at all. Science benefits from people interacting and sharing ideas and getting, bouncing things off of each other and, sharing thought process.
Being human. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I have a different take on that real quick. I
Yeah.
think it does advance if we consider that there are scientists with clearances in these compartments as well. There are physicists, there are theoretical physicists, there's every kind of scientist you can think of involved in some of these compartmented programs. And so advances them, but not civilian science. There's a point, however, that sometimes at a point that what they discover in the compartmented channels that is of scientific merit may seed civilian science, may seed something to develop later that can benefit all of us.
That's
and
true.
So there's a lot of instances of that occurring. One of them is the ability to analyze mammograms. That ability was originally a technology developed by CIA in the National Photographic Interpretation Center, NPIC, before there was NGA. That ability to look at change detection at certain areas of the Soviet Union back in the day, that was then released. The technology was released, and it seeded the ability to detect change in a mammogram. And that's a documented fact. And you can go look at sources from the National Institutes of Health to confirm that actually did occur. So that's just one of them. Lithium-ion batteries was developed as a compartment within CIA. We released the technology of lithium-ion batteries to everyone else. So that's two examples.
Wow.
I could go into hard disk drives. There's a lot of examples. I had a 3D printer back when there were no 3D printers.
What year was that?
93, 94.
Wow. Wow.
That's cool.
That's cool. I mean, that's a good 20 years before it's commercially available.
We got rid of it.
At
We didn't know
least.
what to do with it.
Oh, you didn't know what you could figure out.
No, we're making models. I mean, the guys who were into modeling
Loved it.
we're making model airplanes with it. So you're using taxpayer dollars to have this nice little model you can hang above your, office, and we got rid of it.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you, Dennis Benke, for the $10 donation. He said something to look to. Something to look for in disclosure. I think he was referencing something you said earlier, but thank you for the donation. Derpy Gamer asks, John Ramirez, thank you for being on the Unidentified Celebrity Review. My question is about the human DNA, and did the CIA have any direction of what kind of genetic modification they might be aware of?
They definitely didn't tell me.
Okay.
They just said, yeah, there's alien DNA in the human genome.
Okay.
And that's it. And they told me, like, we went back to right after World War II to confirm that. And that told me, okay, you got bodies somewhere. And that certain people have an enhancement of that alien DNA. That didn't make sense to me back then. But then I look at certain people that seem to have extraordinary experiences. Were they have this enhancement? I don't know.
So they didn't give up the fact of whether or not it was a syringe or maybe sexy time, wah, wah, woo, wah?
Yeah, right. They did not give that. They did give me a location as saying that we're looking at it. It was the northeast corner of the United States. They wouldn't say where in the northeast, but northeast corner of the United States. And later I went back and said, okay, rarely do I put on a conspiracy hat, but I put on my conspiracy hat and said, what's in the northeast corner of the United States where all this could have happened? The other people report strange things happening. And I came up with Montauk. Just, I can't say anything happens at Montauk, but I just came up with that.
Sure.
The other was Plum Island.
Mm-hmm.
Plum Island. Where is that again?
Gosh darn. I don't know. It's near Long Island.
Okay.
There are a lot of sightings
on
up
the
in
East
that area.
Coast.
But Plum Island is an island where they say you're not supposed to go there because there's all these terrible diseases there that we're studying.
Right.
And it's restricted, but they say, but we don't do any classified programs there.
But we're going to shoo you away anyway.
Yeah.
If you show up, we're going to shoo you away for your own safety.
Yeah.
Head science writer, and we really got to get, especially you and Sean, we got to get Sean, Chris, and John in a conversation because I think that would be interesting. But head science writer over at the Debrief, Christopher Plate, says there's zero evidence in the human genome for anything other than actual evolution over millions of years. No evidence of alien intervention in our evolution. None.
Okay, so let me point this out.
What about junk DNA? Isn't that like most of it, and we don't know like kind of what it is?
Well, yeah, that's perfectly explained by evolution.
Okay, no, and
well,
yes,
sure,
evolution is a real thing.
Part of it.
Evolution is a real thing, and evolution is actually the most mathematically sound theory that we have in biological sciences. So, evolution occurs. We've proven that it does occur. The University of Michigan was able to complete a lot of that science. However, for the argument regarding the natural development of DNA, even Francis Crick, who discovered DNA with Watson, and there's a story behind that where Crick took LSD and drew DNA double helix on a napkin at a bar before he discovered that was the actual shape of it. And he said he would deny it if anyone ever talked about that before his death. But there are multiple witnesses who said he supposedly took LSD and drew it before he discovered it. But even he said, from a mathematical perspective, the likelihood that DNA was able to develop here on Earth in the 4 billion years that life's that we had the opportunity to develop life here on Earth would be equivalent to a tornado passing through a junkyard and leaving in its wake a perfectly assembled and functional 737 Boeing aircraft.
But that doesn't even get at the hybrid theory. That's saying that maybe aliens seeded us, or like.
But doesn't evolution include natural selection and artificial selection? I don't know how it conflicts. I've never understood how evolution conflicts with any of these theories, but that could just me being stupid, right? But I think it's the idea of alien interacting with humans, really in any capacity, right, to influence our evolution, or even potentially, breeding with us, right? Like, I don't know how that conflicts with evolution. Does that conflict with evolution somehow? Rather, I truly don't understand.
I think it's possible that somewhere down the lines the aliens, switch some base pairs in our DNA. But I think, my point is that there's absolutely nothing in our DNA history that can't be explained by evolution. So when you talk about
the genome's so confusing, though. Like it's like the ocean, right? And in the sense of all that's why I brought up the junk DNA part, right? Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing what they can actually tell by looking at our DNA.
We only discovered the RNA right in the 50s, which is like it's the whole like transcription of like the DNA. Like I think that it's like the cosmos of like things to be yet discovered.
Serious scientists who are spending their entire life, searching for mysteries in the DNA, and they're not finding anything that's unexplained. They're able to
they're finding new things about it all the time. I feel like they're finding new things about DNA all the time, like 23andMe and Ancestry is constantly updating. And every time somebody adds a new, the new blood to the system, they improve it. I feel like it's one of the most amazing, like I would think it would be very exciting to be studying, this. And I think it would be an exciting theory to consider, even if you didn't believe it. I don't think it conflicts in the very basic sciences. I took with, I don't think it goes against the, the idea of evolution, but I will let the rest of you guys chime in.
Well, I mean, Sean, what do you think of that? Yeah.
Well, there's also a question of, again, bringing it right back to consciousness. What does the connection with consciousness have the potential to do there, right? Because we've got multiple instances in natural evolution of DNA strains and creatures that eyeballs have developed independently, where an eyeballed creature wasn't a part of the chain where an eyeball developed, and the eyeball develops about the same every time it develops. And there have been crustaceans that have developed multiple times in independent development chains where that has happened a number of times, and that is well beyond the mathematical probability of chance of that occurring. So
no, it's not. That's perfectly explainable by evolution. They're adapting to their environment. We need to have optical sensors to navigate our environment. That makes perfect sense.
But at the same time, I was standing with Bruce Damer when he got the picture of the RNA chain that he had developed, that he had created from absolutely nothing, from a primordial soup that he put in a cistern, and then he rocked back and forth at the Galapagos Islands on top of a volcanic vent. And so, there is no process that can explain the creation of that RNA out of the soup. There's no chemical creative process that explains what he did, yet he was able to do it. And I personally believe he should be up for a Nobel for that work. Although I guess there's a number of things that I learned about the politics in that whole process that may exclude him. But he created RNA from this soup can that he rocked back and forth, and there's no explanation for how that occurs if you're not bringing in the potential for conscious organization. Like you have these self-organizing structures of, how do we have a lot of big questions to answer of, where does an atom start to sing opera, right? Because you have an atom that is a self-organizing structure of subatomic particles, which becomes a self-organizing structure of a molecule, which becomes a self-organizing structure of organic molecules. And then, where does that consciousness come in? Because then you have multiple organic molecules that come together in a symbiotic form to create an organism that then starts to replicate, right? Where is that magic coming from? What is the driving mechanism behind that? And then we need to take that into consideration of how would that then influence DNA, and could there be that mechanism then also driving DNA towards survivability and evolutionary development that then does adapt to the environment in which it's placed, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'd argue that if some guy can make RNA by putting it in a tin can and putting it on a volcanic vent, that kind of kills your argument that it's takes something special to create that spark of life. It seems like if they can do it, then that's proof that it's
but what's the right? But what's the mechanism? What's the mechanism?
Well, I mean, it's certainly not aliens in that case, right?
It's not aliens in that case.
It's the ingredients in that tin can and the laws of physics.
But isn't it kind of like saying, what about like dogs? If they become aware, they'd be like, did humans have something to do with us? I mean, sometimes I feel a little bit that's how we're talking, right? Of course, we have a lot to do with, the 3 different breeds, of dogs, in my house. And there was no breeding. There was no disruption of evolution there. And that's just in our own, just like, how many years, that we've been messing with our pets, right? And all the think about what we do to farm animals and the crazy eggs we create. I mean, it's marvelous. It's amazing. It's horrifying. This Plum Island I was looking up, we're experimenting with animal pathogens. So I think this idea that some other advanced beings could be messing with us in any way that we mess with, each other and other animals is not that extreme. And I don't see how it really conflicts with the basic ideas of evolution or goes against any even foundational sciences or biological sciences. I just don't know that there's a conflict here. It's like, what evidence are we seeking, right? Are we seeking the Rosetta Stone of the alien DNA? That's why I bring up the junk DNA of all the there's a lot of mysterious mystery to our DNA, right? Like, what is that evidence, that we're looking for? I don't know.
Yeah, I would say there would be, some evidence of, a sequence of DNA that doesn't exist in any of our ancestors, that only exists in some out there unknown.
How far back do you go? But how far back do you go? Do you go a million? Do you go 2 million? Yeah. Do you go
the very beginning?
John, isn't that what you're talking about though? I mean,
it could have been at any point though, right?
You have the CIA doesn't hire dummies, and of course you're going to have medical doctors on staff and geneticists on staff, et cetera. And if you have somebody that comes to you in some type of a briefing and says, We believe that we are hybrids. Wouldn't that suggest then that there is a strand of genetic code that exists inside of an alien life form that also shows up in human life form that sure, theoretically could have accidentally, by happy accidents, developed over time through conscious or unconscious or intentional or unintentional development. But from a CIA standpoint, if they're saying we think we're hybrids, wouldn't that suggest to you that we've got some pretty conclusive evidence of something over here that shows up over here, and the only way that would have done that is because they were mixed between the two at one point?
I would say this, that
Well, we're I think 45 minutes after the hour, but I think that my contention is that it wasn't an official, part of your official capabilities that they were briefing you on this, and it wasn't a classified official CIA meeting. So I
was a
question that it's
CIA
actually,
meeting.
the
Just
official
because
CIA
it's not classified doesn't make it any less a CIA meeting. Why would you say
you
that?
said there were academics in there and like other people, and it was in a hotel
It's
lobby,
a CIA
or a
meeting.
hotel conference
It is
room?
a CIA meeting sponsored by CIA officers, by a CIA office. So why would you say just because it's unclassified, it's not any less legitimate than any other classified CIA meeting? Having you never served in CIA or
Well,
any
I guess most
intelligence
jobs that I've
community
had, they
agency.
would.
Yeah, well, answer.
It wasn't anything that you worked on, or you weren't briefed on this because you were in a working group or in something that needed this knowledge, right? This was just.
How do you know that? I haven't told you the full story. You're making suppositions on things I can't say yet, which is why I wanted to get the permission to say what I know. That'll fill in the rest of the gaps, including who briefed it and why. Why were we there? Those things you don't know.
I can't.
Okay, I think
You're making-
previous.
you're making
I hope you get
suppositions
permission.
based on your own biases and your own prejudices without any foundation. If I could take you to CIA, and if you could even qualify to get a security clearance, I would love to give you one. Because the fact of the matter is that we discuss things out in the open as well as closed doors. And the fact that this briefing occurred in an unclassified setting doesn't make it any less legitimate than something that's classified. Now, what the intention was of this particular office, if you knew the office, it makes more sense of why they did that. And if you knew who was there and the context of when this occurred in relation to everything else, it will make a lot more sense. Okay. So
last time you said that there was no context given. You specifically said there was no context given.
There was no context for the actual full scope of the meeting. But what I'm saying by context, I mean that there were three things. They were talking about CIA's involvement with UFOs from 1947 to 1990. They talked about how certain aircraft that we were flying, testing out of Area 51, Station D, was mistaken for UFOs, and how that the McMinnville UFO was a real UFO. And then they launched into, oh, by the way, we looked at, we were interested in the alien DNA, which we discovered, if we go back to after World War II, and that suggests to me that there's bodies. Do you believe there are bodies? You probably don't believe there are bodies. You probably believe that Roswell never happened because you don't have any evidence of it, right? Right.
But I believe that there's a metallic poop that's dropping out of these orbs that we collected.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
And why not? Why not back then? Why not back then? Why do you believe something crashed in the desert near Roswell, New Mexico, and that the craft and the bodies were retrieved, and there's been a cover-up of that fact all these years?
I don't
know.
Idea.
I mean,
you don't have an idea. That's exactly right.
But here's
you're
the thing,
expressing
though, John.
ideas you don't know. And the third thing that we just wait a minute, I got to finish.
Okay, yeah.
The third thing we discussed was how in the future there will be an information technology revolution. So this information will be more out in the open. Yeah. That's the third part of that briefing. That's the context. That stand by, all this information is going to come out.
Well,
and now all the information is coming out. Otherwise, you guys won't be here.
Well,
we could have kept it even more secret. This government didn't need to release those 3 videos. We wouldn't be having discussion. You'd still be back going around in circles, making cyclic arguments on things you don't know and that you will never know. Yet the government's providing you information We're trying to provide you with information to further the dialogue, and all we get is resistance from people like you who refuses to believe. Admit that you're a skeptic.
Well, but hold on.
I mean, I
hold on. Wait,
want to know.
Rather, let me pop in here. I look. We try not to tell anybody to believe anything. Like, we need proof, and I think that's okay to ask for.
Okay.
I don't have the craft. I don't have the bodies of Roswell. We have the story. We have the newspaper clippings.
Right.
We have the witnesses. We have a context to it. But it's just like JFK. We don't know who shot him because there's parts of our government that aren't being 100% honest, and they don't even need to be 100% honest. Right now, I feel like we're getting maybe 1 to 2% honesty from our government. And the reason why this conversation keeps going back in circles is because there's no leadership, there's no clarity, and so it's not that we don't want to believe. We all want to believe it, but we also feel like
if they're friendly.
What I was going to say, I think there's a danger in just blindly believing that Roswell happened without having any actual proof of it. Yeah, I think that's fair, though, right, John? Like we can't just blindly believe it.
Why are you even having these shows? If you're coming from that perspective,
because we're curious. We're curious.
Because the government told us that there's 146 things.
Right. Well, to your point, Lou, it's exactly right that we don't have any evidence out in the public eye. But there are people who do have evidence behind the scenes, and they're slowly releasing this information, all of it. The high strangeness aspects, alien DNA aspects, maybe there's a breakaway civilization aspect, all of it. It's all coming out from various sources.
Yeah.
And so as an all source analyst, I take all sources.
Right.
Okay. And I'm trying to how does this fit into some kind of tapestry that makes sense, that makes a picture that I can look at and finally get some clue. I only know a sliver of that story, and that's what I'm sharing with you without evidence. I don't have evidence. They didn't give me evidence, but I know there are people with the evidence. And whether that comes out in the future, I don't know. But it seems like it's happening at a faster rate.
I agree with you.
They're preparing us for something.
I agree. And look, I haven't seen you this animated on any other show. So the fact that you're super confident that you believe you're going to get the permission to eventually reveal some of these details, so that way we could get some more context, and then we can finally shut up Rather, because God knows he talks way too much. I'm kidding.
I would love to be but show me the evidence.
But no, I think we want to be wrong on this, right? But we as a show, I'm trying to be careful with giving people definitive answers on things and telling them to believe one thing or another thing. I don't want to tell. Yeah, I don't want. Right. And I would. Right. But But I mean, the way you asked Rather, well, you probably don't believe, as in, like, it felt a little bit as if, well, because we don't believe Roswell, we can't.
No, because I'm providing you with information that this meeting occurred. I'm providing you information with what I was told in this meeting.
Right.
Now, do you believe the meeting occurred? Yes or no?
I do. I do believe the meeting occurred.
Do you believe that what I was told to me? And I'm just relating it. Okay. That's all I know.
Right.
And then you're asking me about evidence and show me proof and show me that. I don't have it.
Right. No. And that's not where we're at. We're not asking you for proof. I just want to be clear that we're not telling people what to believe or how to think on this. Like, I want people to think as independently as possible. And I think that's why Rather is pushing so hard, because we want to make sure that there is a check back to this information, because there's going to have to be. Eventually, we're going to have this conversation as a species, and there's going to be a back and forth. And I think the reason why I think conversations like this are important is because we're already starting to lay the foundation of how these conversations are going to go. And then once we get more context, more proof, more information, more data, then this conversation starts evolving, just like the human genome, into whatever it ends up being. But I think the conversation is important, and we need to have it. But there has to be pushback to it, because the information is wild. It's absolutely wild, and it's hard to comprehend. So, again, it's nothing. It's not a personal attack.
If you want, no. I don't look at it that way. I'm just saying this is what I was told. I'm sharing what I was told. This is the reason why I go on these podcasts.
Right.
This is what I was told. I can't prove any of it. They didn't give me any proof. I have no evidence.
Right. Well, I can't.
But when I hear things like just because it's unclassified, it's not a real CIA meeting.
Right.
That's stupid. That's absolutely stupid. And I'll say this right out.
We told us that it wasn't just CIA people there. There was,
that there's CIA sponsors inviting the academics. It was sponsored by CIA. That's
rather you can comprehend how not every CIA meeting is classified, right?
And just because it's classified doesn't make it any less legitimate.
The distinction that I'm trying to make is that, there's people like Lou Elizondo who, worked in programs and had, classified knowledge of, things that we know that they can't tell because of NDAs and stuff, and likely has seen evidence. And then, we have stories from you where there's essentially, it sounds like to me that there was a CIA meeting that was kind of just informative, not really to do with your day-to-day job operations.
How do you know what my job was?
I feel like a lot of people conflate. Excuse me?
No. Are you saying?
Well, yeah, I feel like a lot of people conflate that. No, I feel like some, and maybe not you specifically, but people who listen to you conflate your experience with the CIA with people like Elizondo's experience with the DoD. And I think that there's a significant difference. Yours is, A to B, a couple of degrees of separation before any evidence takes place. Whereas like Elizondo, we know that he was presumably working directly with the evidence.
Right, because he still has clearances and I don't. I used to have clearances. So I'm relating to you things I learned when I don't really need to invoke a clearance because it was unclassified. Now, what you should ask.
And I guess my point is just that I take what was said at that meeting with a bigger grain of salt than I might take someone else who had direct experience and looked at the evidence. I think that's fair.
Yeah, and somebody asked Lou if hybrid DNA exists. Somebody asked Lou if implants are real. Ask him, yes or no, and see what he says. No one's ever asked him.
Let's do it. Let's get him on.
Yeah, we got to get him on. We got to get him on. All right. Well, look, we've gone almost 40 minutes over our show, and this conversation has flown by again. But I'm gonna end it here just because it's been a great conversation. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everybody's questions. And Cloud did have a question that said, are crop circles fake or is there something more to it? I mean, talk about throwing a grenade in a room, pal. I mean, like, how do we answer that in 10 seconds? But what do you think? You think crop circles are made by Kraft, John? Yes or no?
Kraft?
Or orbs?
ETs.
Or beings.
Non-human.
Oh, some are.
Okay.
I think some are. Otherwise, NGA wouldn't have a effort to analyze circles on the Earth.
Okay. Fair enough. Well, Mr. Ramirez, thank you for entertaining us. Thank you for being patient with us. I know some of these kind of questions can be frustrating for you because you know the process, you lived it, you breathed it for so long. And as amateurs, as people who are not in the intelligence community, it is very shocking for me to learn that the CIA has meetings in hotels that are not classified, that anybody might be able to walk into if they're at the right place at the right time. That's shocking to me. But as a CIA agent, you're saying, no, that's a normal thing that happens all the time, depending on what's being discussed. So that, and we also learned how you met your wife, which was amazing. So John Ramirez, thank you. When you do get permission to talk about the details of this meeting, will you please come share them with Rather?
Oh, you'll know.
Yeah, I have a feeling. We will.
Yeah.
I did have one last question for you. I'm sorry to do that. Somebody said earlier this week on Twitter that you requested an interview from them to be on their show. And that didn't sound like John Ramirez. Is that something you've done before?
Requested who?
An interview on a show. Do you solicit yourself to be on shows?
No.
Okay. Yeah.
No,
because I've asked you to be on my show.
I got people trying to get me on their show.
Right.
And I said no, but there are people that I owe an answer to because they wanted me to be on their show, and I said, okay, let's see what my schedule is.
Yeah. Okay, no, I just wanted to clear that up because
What show is that?
It didn't sound like. I'll tell you off air. I don't want to even give it credence. But I appreciate you being here, sir. And again, thank you for the patience, and rather thank you for the great questions. And Sean, thank you for being here and also adding just another wonderful layer to this conversation. I thought it was a lot of fun. I'm going to put you guys back in the green room. Feel free to stay or stick around or leave if you got to go do something, go eat some dinner. We've kept you for so long. So I appreciate both of you guys.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks, guys.
And check out, again, Sean's link for his podcast and everything is down below, again, with John Ramirez's link to his Twitter. So if you guys want to reach out and ask him questions, all the links are in the description below. All right. I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right. That was a show today, you guys. Wow. We went almost a 3-hour show.
But
Almost
like,
a 3. I mean, we could go
minutes.
5 hours. We could go 5 hours.
We didn't even bring up the hotel meeting until 2.5 hours.
We barely even got into the hotel meeting, and yeah, we've. I mean, look, we could go on for a long time about this, and I think your questions are fair. Rather, I think he answered those questions pretty well.
Yeah.
I can understand his frustration because it's like. It almost feels like somebody asking you about the most mundane part of your job. You know, and you have to sit there and explain it to them. Okay, this is how this works. This is how this is possible. You know what I mean? Like that's how it kind of felt a little bit. Like, and he doesn't like when you presume things. That's for sure.
Sure.
What? That's
I agree with
that. No, that was great. I'm thinking about the reptilians, and are they associated with the orbs, and are the grays associated with the discs? For the record, I'm more than 50% in the Roswell happened camp. But I'm also like you guys in that I have barely seen a UFO. So,
right.
You know, the evidence is elusive. But maybe we'll hear about the other disc, right, where there wasn't a landing and there wasn't bodies. Like maybe that can be disclosed. That's safe enough, and then it can just we just all presume that Roswell happened at that point.
I mean, I guess let me ask you this rather: what would it take to convince you that the meeting he had in this hotel room? Do you believe it happened? I think you said yes, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's unclear to me if it was a CIA meeting or if it was a kind of like a UFO conference kind of thing. Or
I mean, he made it clear.
No.
He made it clear it was a CIA meeting. It was a meeting put on by the CIA, and they're the ones who reached out to people and invited them to this hotel.
Yeah, I mean,
that's what he says. That's what he made that clear. Like this was not a UFO con. This was not some meeting, some MUFON meeting or something like that.
Yeah, I feel like there was a lot of different answers. I feel like there were different answers in this hour than there were in our original interview. But maybe I need to go back and watch that again because I feel like we did get different answers. Like there was no context. Explicitly said there was no context for the meeting. That he was just kind of invited as an aside. Hey, John, check this out. We think you might find it interesting.
There's just things that he left out, like the name of the person or the organization that set up the meeting. So he has to, you kind of have to fill in the gaps. I think when he was talking about no context, I think he just meant he didn't know what the meeting was set up for, but he knew who was setting it up, and he knew around what was going on in the CIA at the time it was being set up, and he can't share that.
I think that's true.
Could
the whole context of why
some of the
the context of why the meeting was set up, that seems to be the real interesting thing to me that I wish I knew more of.
I just wish I could remote view. I could be a fly that could astral project remote view back in time to this hotel meeting and
so now that I become death, listen up, rather be Mussolini, and then let Leonard Lindback rather is rude and an idiot. And then there's a lot of people.
I'm just trying to understand things. I really am.
No, I think you are, and I think there was a lot of people in the audience that appreciated your questions, and I think we did. I mean, there were totally new questions and answers so far. I think that's absolutely right.
And if the questions weren't asked, people would be like, well, you're not asking tough enough questions.
Right. Or we get the same answers that we've heard in other interviews, So, I mean, like, I honestly, my favorite part was how he met his wife, I think, in that whole interview. I thought that was really fascinating. I kind of wanted to dive more into that. But
I think we should, maybe a new sponsor of the show, we should reach out to them. MeetMindful.com.
Mindful. Yeah. What was it again?
Single believers out there.
Mindfulhappiness.com. I put it in the chat. It's way up in
Meetmindful.com. Yeah.
Meetmindful.com.
That might be Sean Webb has a similar Instagram channel, I think.
So Jane, you got anything cooking this week?
Oh man, well we got Red Panda finally on. Had to reschedule the stream last Thursday, so that'll be on last Thursday. And then this month we will have the Weird UFO show return. We'll have another Keeping It Weird, and then the end of the month is going to be last Thursday of the month. We'll do Weird Hollywood. Jess Rogie, and we'll break down Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which Lou Elizondo, the other guy in the room, who knows a lot of things, can't talk about, said that movie is pretty darn accurate, or the closest Hollywood movie to what this UFO phenomenon is. So we're gonna break it down, and
I do love that film. Have you watched it ever?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah,
oh yes, I've delved down into. There's things about the Devil's Tower. Oh, there's things about remote viewing.
Yeah,
guys,
there's all sorts of stuff. There's all sorts of stuff going on in there.
It'll be a good conversation. So subscribe to YouTube for that.
Definitely sub. Rather, what do you got cooking this week? Anything?
Oh yeah, I've been really getting into the rabbit hole of that Sean Webb introduced me to, of the studies that show that ESP is actually real, and there are studies that show that. I think that there's still some debate about what that means for science and if those studies should be believed. But I find that really interesting. I'm gonna put together a little video on that on my channel.
Oh, you just wait till this Close Encounters remote viewing connection that I'll be revisiting. It's a good one. It's a CIA remote viewing Close Encounters of the Third Kind connection. So it's fun.
Love it.
All the guys.
Stay tuned this week. We've got a really great week coming up. I know we started off super strong with this interview today. Tomorrow we've got Josh and Artemis on Daniel Miller's show. On Wednesday we've got Dan Warren, and then on Friday we've got the ADX Project stopping by, which looks to be an interesting conversation with William Faria. So stay tuned for that. Check out the links below for merch, Discord, everybody that was on the show. Thank you, Das Tapes. Thank you, Sean Webb. Thank you, John Ramirez. Thank you to you guys. Until next time, you guys. Thank you so damn much for coming aboard, getting weird with us here on another episode of the Unidentified Celebrity Review, your home for credible news, reviews, and commentary on everything UAP and UFO. Until next time, stay safe out there. We love you. Peace.
Hi.
I'm going to tell you all right now, all of these wonderful people would not be here without Patreon supporters like you. If you enjoy credible news, reviews, and commentary on UFOs and UAPs 5 days a week, you want to support this show. What's your name? Marty. Marty, look how easy this is, Marty. Pick up your phone. Boom, you're a Patreon member. I mean, look, it's so easy. You just click the link, which is right here. Just for $1 a month, you can support this show. Just fill out the information and pledge what's comfortable for you. It could be $1, $5, $10, or who knows. Just support.